These creepy, unexplained disappearances have left police baffled. As they search for answers, the family and friends of the missing people have tried to raise awareness of their own cases and reach out to the people who might have information, even if they don't know it. Jackson Brent Garcia was last seen by his cousin on the day after Christmas 2020. Without warning, he left the house and has not been seen or heard from since. Brent was 18 years old, living in Sumter County, South Carolina at the time of his mysterious disappearance. He was very close to his family, in particular his grandmother, who he lived with. He had ambitions of becoming a veterinarian and adored animals. Christmas Day of 2020 was like any other. The family came together at Brent's mother's house and enjoyed a typical celebration, including good food and gift giving. None of Brent's family noticed anything out of the ordinary about him, and had no idea this would be the last time any of them saw him. At the end of the visit, he left with his grandmother, Jean, but didn't return home with her. Instead, he went to visit a cousin. This wasn't too odd, but it was out of character for Brent to go somewhere without telling anyone. Brent and his cousin spent the evening playing games. At one point, his brother called and they chatted for a while. Then at 5:30 p.m., he received a call from his grandmother. She asked if he was going to be coming home for the night, and Brent assured her that he would be home soon. This was the last time that she heard from him. When Brent didn't return home, Jean tried to call him again but never got a response. But Brent's location was still known at this point. He didn't leave his cousin's home and instead apparently decided to stay the night there. This was now extremely out of character. It was very strange for him to not let his grandmother know where he was, let alone lie about his plans to come home. It was the evening of December 26th when Brent completely vanished. He and his cousin had taken the dog outside at around 7 p.m. After the dog was finished, Brent's cousin took the dog back inside, but Brent never followed. His cousin didn't actually see Brent leave the house, but when he went back to look for him, Brent had completely disappeared. Brent's mother reported him as a missing person a few days later. Sniffer dogs picked up his scent at a Family Dollar store on Route 15. This was roughly an hour-and-a-half walk from Brent's cousin's home, and nowhere near his grandmother's. A search of the surrounding area turned up no clues, though. Brent's family has spent the last 2.5 years searching for answers and helping to raise awareness of other missing person cases in the local area. A $10,000 reward is offered for information leading to Brent. Anyone with information can contact the Sumter County Sheriff's Office at 803-436-2000. May of 2023 marks 6 months since Grady Bruce Benson disappeared from his home in Cotton County, Oklahoma. The 69-year-old man vanished without a trace after bringing dinner to his son and telling him that he wouldn't be out to work the next day. A full day passed before anybody realized Bruce was missing. After searching the home, they found nothing that could explain what had happened. Bruce was a farmer who lived on his property just outside of the town of Randlet. He lived with his wife of 50 years, Maxine, and saw their only child, a son named Grady, often as he also worked on the farm. According to Maxine, he lived his whole life within a mile of his home. On November 9th, 2023, Bruce and Maxine spent the day together. That evening, they went with friends to eat out at a fish restaurant in Waurika. At the end of the meal, the couple went their separate ways. Maxine was going on a long-planned girls' trip to Montana. Bruce was last seen by his son that night. He brought dinner out to his son, who was changing a tire on the plow in the field. They then both returned to the barn, where Bruce helped Grady get air into some tires. Grady left the barn and returned shortly afterward to find his father by his pickup truck. Bruce told Grady that he had a bit of a cough and he likely wouldn't be coming out to the fields the next day. He told Grady not to worry about it. The last time Grady saw Bruce was about 8 p.m. The next day, Bruce didn't come out into the fields, but Grady didn't think anything of it. Maxine also didn't think anything of her unanswered text messages. Bruce wasn't much of a texter, but it was concerning when he didn't reply to her messages. Maxine called Grady, asking him to check on his father. He visited the house on November 8th and found nothing out of place. The house was all locked up and the garage door was closed. All of Grady's vehicles were where they were meant to be. Thinking his father was just out, Grady left and returned after lunch, but nothing had been moved. Bruce's phone, wallet, car keys, and jacket were all found in the truck, which was left unlocked. That was also strange, as Bruce always left the vehicle locked. Maxine believes he only had a few pocket knives, chapstick, and a pair set of keys to her car when he vanished. She also believes he didn't make it home that night, as none of the food in the house had been eaten. Police believe Bruce's disappearance is suspicious. He has no known health issues and no enemies. What happened to him will likely remain a mystery until he's found. There's a $25,000 reward per information leading to Bruce's location. Any information can be passed to the Cotton County Sheriff's Office at 580-875-3383 or the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation at 405-848-6724. Andrew Dill disappeared without a trace from Birmingham, England in April of 2003. The exact circumstances of Andrew's disappearance are unclear, but his family has appealed for answers on the recent 20th anniversary of his vanishing. Andrew was 38 years old at the time of his disappearance and lived in Birmingham's city center. He's described as having very strong family connections, and it was very unlike him to disappear without telling anyone his location. The last confirmed sighting was at Birmingham New Street train station on the evening of April 28, 2003. He'd caught a train home from Hednesford in Staffordshire. The exact timings aren't known, but the West Midlands police note that he arrived in Birmingham in the late evening. None of Andrew's family or friends would see him again. Over the next couple of days, there were some reported sightings in Birmingham city center, and his loved ones received text messages from Andrew's phone. All contact suddenly stopped on May 20th, and Andrew was eventually reported missing. The police were able to determine that Andrew's phone had stayed in the Birmingham area in the weeks after he was last seen, but they weren't able to trace it to an exact location. That phone still hasn't been found. The contents of the text messages have never been revealed, but the police said in a statement that Andrew's phone may have been in someone else's possession after April 28th. It's possible that what happened to Andrew had already happened when his loved ones were receiving text messages. The police believe that the phone may be key to finding out what happened to Andrew. It was a light blue Nokia 3310 with dark blue trim and an orange network logo. If somebody did have Andrew's phone after his disappearance, finding out who that was could be the clue to finally solving this missing person case. His family is hopeful that he may still be alive and appealed for information. Andrew had 3 children when he vanished, and has missed important milestones in their lives and the lives of other family members. Anyone with information can contact the Steelhouse Lane Police Station on 0121-626-8716 or Crime Stoppers at 0800-555-111. The last time Michael Farrell was seen, he was heading towards his cabin aboard a ferry en route to Wales, across the Irish Sea. When the ferry arrived in Pembroke, there was no sign of the 30-year-old father of 3. 28 years have passed since Michael disappeared, but his family is still hopeful that he may be alive, or that someone might be able to provide answers as to what happened to him. The father of 3 worked as a cinema manager. His work required him to start the film projector, and at 8:30 p.m. on September 19, 1994, he was doing just that. 2 hours later, he was supposed to start the next film for the evening, but that film went unplayed. At 10:30 p.m., the time the second film was supposed to start, one of Michael's coworkers spotted him heading towards his cabin. The cabin was located at the bottom of the ship. None of the crew working that day noticed anything out of the ordinary and said he was in good form when he was last seen. Meanwhile, one of the passengers had been searching for Michael to reclaim a newspaper that Michael had borrowed earlier in the day. When that passenger couldn't find Michael, a search began. The crew searched the ship from top to bottom multiple times before it arrived at Pembroke in Wales at 12:30 a.m. on September 20th. All of his belongings were still in his cabin, and there was nothing out of place aboard the ferry, but Michael was nowhere to be found. When the ferry arrived in Wales, cars were searched as they disembarked. Another detailed search of the ferry took place, but there was nowhere that Michael could have been hiding or could have been hidden. The Coast Guard was informed and a sea search took place. It also failed to turn up anything. Michael left behind 3 children. Almost 30 years on, he now has at least 1 granddaughter. His family is still hopeful that answers can be found. On the 25th anniversary of Michael's disappearance, his sister appealed directly to him. It's possible Michael avoided being spotted and decided to start a new life in Wales or elsewhere in Britain. It is, of course, possible that he went overboard, though, but there would have been no reason for Michael to be on deck at the time of his disappearance. That also wouldn't explain why he was heading down to his cabin when he should have been on duty in the cinema. During the 25th anniversary appeal, the Irish police revealed that they were following new lines of inquiry. Unfortunately, those don't appear to have led to Michael, but it seems there is still information about his location out there, waiting to be uncovered. Anyone with information can contact the Missing Person Charity at 116000. Gregory Keith Mann disappeared under suspicious circumstances after a night out with friends in May of 1997. Foul play is suspected in his case, but so far there aren't any theories as to what happened to him. Keith was last seen at 11:45 p.m. on May 10, 1997. He was a car salesman working at Rob Roberts Ford in Wichita Falls, Texas, a job he had held for 2 months. On the day of his disappearance, he worked an ordinary shift, selling 2 cars and earning some good commission that would be included in his next paycheck. He went home to the apartment he had recently moved into at Fountain Gate Apartments. Keith had moved in the previous month when the apartment became available early. His fiancée, Carrie, had recently graduated from university and would be moving in after a weekend of celebration with her parents. That evening, he spoke with Carrie on the phone before meeting up with 2 friends. Chris was his coworker at the car dealership, and Michelle was his girlfriend. The 3 were in a black Nissan Pathfinder that Chris had borrowed from the dealership. At the time, the dealership allowed salesmen to borrow demo cars, and Keith had actually borrowed a red Mustang demo car for the weekend. Over the next few hours, the 3 went to a number of locations, including a Fina gas station, where they bought alcohol, and a McDonald's. It's believed they also went mudding, getting the car dirty in the process. At around 11:30 p.m., they visited a car wash where Keith told his friends he needed to get home soon. He was going to meet someone 15 minutes past midnight, but he didn't tell Chris who he was going to meet or where. The friends dropped Keith off at 11:45 p.m. and watched him walk up the steps to the apartment building. They didn't see him go inside, but items bought at the gas station were found in the apartment. That afternoon, Carrie arrived at the apartment to find it empty. She didn't believe Keith had stayed there that night, and when she called his parents, they hadn't heard from him either. The Mustang Keith had borrowed for the weekend was found in the parking lot of St. Mark's United Methodist Church, a spot near Keith's family home that he would often use for parking. The car was locked, but the trunk was unlatched. It seemed like the car had been cleaned, and one of the panels in the trunk had been removed. The police believe foul play is likely in this strange disappearance, but it's not clear who would want to hurt Keith or why. The answer to that question may lie with whoever Keith met that night, but they've never come forward. Anyone with information on this case can contact the Wichita Falls Police Department at 940-761-7762. Some missing person cases are particularly hard to solve, since there's very little information for investigators to follow up on. It becomes even harder when even the most trivial of details are unknown, which is the uphill battle faced by those who are still looking for answers in Darla Lee Miller's unsolved case. The mysterious disappearance of 33-year-old Darla Lee Miller occurred on the 1st of June, 1996, in Westland, Michigan. It's known that she'd gotten into a heated argument with her son while speaking to him on the phone that day, but there are very few other details available that may lead to her current location. What is known, however, is that she was last seen about 20 miles west of Detroit. Witnesses told the police that they saw her near West Roosevelt Avenue, but she's had no contact with her family and friends since, and there's been no further sightings or leads in her case. Police released a description of Darla, but frustratingly, it isn't even known what she was wearing when she was last seen. The details that are known are as follows. Darla is described as having brown hair and blue eyes. She's around 5 foot 2 inches tall, and at the time of her strange disappearance, she weighed around 130 pounds, though her weight may have changed since then. The Westland Police Department has asked anyone with information on Darla's disappearance to contact them via telephone at 734-722-9600. Darla's NamUs case number is MP58324. Foul play is not expected in Darla's disappearance. It's always disconcerting when a missing person has made plans with friends or family members before they mysteriously vanish, since it seems to indicate that they didn't have any intention of disappearing of their own free will. This is exactly what happened in the case of Caden Black's disappearance from Wrightsville in Pennsylvania in December of 2017, when he vanished after making plans with his mother for Christmas Day and a friend who he was supposed to meet the day after he was last seen. Just a few weeks before Caden vanished, he started working for a moving company in Windsor, and he had solid relationships with both his mother and father, despite moving out of his father's house the previous year. Following this move, Caden then stayed with one of his friends in Wrightsville, and it's during this time that he started his new job. His mother told investigators that she spoke to Caden on the phone on the 14th of December, and they decided that he would spend Christmas Eve and Christmas Day with her. But he never arrived and she never saw him again. A coworker added that they had dinner with Caden on the 16th of December, during which they decided to meet up again the following day, the 17th. This is the same day that Caden last spoke to his father on the phone. During their conversation, Caden said that he would see his father the next day and that he would take his father's dog for a run, as he was in the habit of doing every Sunday. But Caden never arrived for any of his appointments, and he was reported as a missing person on the 20th of December. Witnesses told investigators that they saw Caden on Vickley Drive on the night of the 17th, but there have been no further sightings. During the investigation into Caden's strange disappearance, it was noted that he likely had his phone with him, and investigators found that it was last active about 3 miles from Old Commons Road. A search was conducted in a 6-mile radius around this area, including ground crews as well as water searches, but no further leads were found. Caden's wallet has also never been found, and it's believed that he had it with him at the time of his disappearance. His family would also tell the police that they had noted a marked change in Caden's behavior just before he disappeared. They stated that he had become withdrawn and quieter than he used to be since he started his new job, but that they're unsure whether the change in his behavior was connected to his new position. This is yet another case in which it's unknown what Caden was wearing at the time, but his parents told the police that he was usually wearing dark-colored clothing. He's described as having brown hair, brown eyes, and he's 5 foot 10 inches tall, weighing around 160 pounds. If you or anyone you know have information on Caden's case, you're asked to contact the Lower Windsor Township Police Department at 717-244-8055. Alternatively, you can contact Crime Stoppers at 800-843-5678. Caden's NamUs case number is MP99136. It's been over a year since 26-year-old Tommy Williams disappeared from his mother's house in Rochester, New York, and his case has an element of eeriness to it as he seemingly predicted his own disappearance. At the time, Tommy was known to do odd jobs around town to make money, and on the 2nd of February 2022, he was at home when his mother left for work, but before she left, Tommy asked her to give him a hug and a kiss, saying, "You never know, I might become missing." But she didn't think it was meant to be a foreboding statement. When his mother returned home from work later that day, she expected to see Tommy in the house, but he was nowhere to be found, and he has since left no indication of where he was going. She decided to report him as missing. Surveillance footage from Garson Avenue and Chamberlain Street showed Tommy speaking to a man who wasn't known to his family, but the man has since been tracked down, interviewed, and excluded from the investigation, since it was found that they were merely talking about extra work for Tommy. An extensive search of the area was conducted, but search dogs and drones were unable to find any further clues. Investigators are at a loss in Tommy's case, since they don't believe he's come to any harm, but he hasn't contacted any of his friends or relatives. Tommy's description was given as a male with black hair and brown eyes. He weighs about 180 pounds and stands 5 foot 9 inches tall. In the surveillance footage, Tommy was wearing a red hoodie, gray jeans, and an orange jacket. He also has multiple tattoos, the most obvious of which is the initials NCW under his left eye. The Rochester Police Department is investigating Tommy's disappearance, and anyone with information can contact them at 585-428-6720. Tommy's NamUs case number is MP89175. It's not often the case that a family is searching for a missing loved one, only to find out that police have no idea of their disappearance. In the strange case of the disappearance of Diana Avera, it took 38 years before anyone realized that she had not been reported missing. This oversight occurred because Diana had spent time in a psychiatric facility called Searcy Hospital after she was arrested for disorderly conduct in May of 1982 in Vernon, Alabama. During this time, the 22-year-old would often write to her family, asking them to visit her at the hospital where she was treated for paranoid schizophrenia. Her family did visit her on a few occasions, but in August of 1982, Diana took it upon herself to leave the hospital without permission, and she mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Diana's family was told that both the police and Searcy Hospital were in the process of opening a missing person case, but it would come to light in 2020 that this was never done, and Diana's case was never properly investigated. When a case was finally opened, investigators were provided with some of Diana's medical files, but they held very little info and did not aid in the case in any way. It should also be noted that Diana had no intentions of harming herself, but she was desperate to see her 2 sons. Her family has since provided investigators with DNA in hopes that a familial match could be made and Diana could be located. She was last known to have contact with a female Searcy employee and a man that she used to date, but they also haven't been located. The police don't think Diana came to any harm, and they believe she disappeared voluntarily. Diana would be 63 years old today, and at the time of her disappearance, she had blonde hair and hazel eyes. She's between 5 feet and 5 foot 3 inches tall, and at the time, she weighed between 100 and 120 pounds. The only identifying mark is a scar that she has on her right thigh. Anyone with information on Diana's case is urged to contact the Mobile County Sheriff's Office at 251-581-1181. Diana's NamUs case number is MP72498. On the 5th of July, 2022, 36-year-old Erica Johnson from Cape Coral, Florida, was en route to Tampa by bus, but during her journey, she mysteriously disappeared and she remains missing to this day. On that day, Erica got a ride with a coworker from Best Western Plus Beach Resort, which is located in Fort Myers Beach, where she was employed as a housekeeper. She got out of their car at a bus stop in Fort Myers, from where she planned to take a bus to Tampa, but she was seen in surveillance footage getting off the bus at the Cape Coral Transit Center at 5:37 p.m., just over an hour after getting on. In this footage, she's wearing a dark blue shirt, black shorts, black shoes, a black hat, and a white face mask. She also has a green backpack and is carrying a plastic bag, though it isn't known what items were in the bag. 2 days later, she was again captured by security cameras getting on a bus at 5:21 a.m. at the same transit center, and this time she had her luggage, a pillow, and a rabbit cage in her possession. Witnesses then saw her again later that same day in Fort Myers, where she got on a Greyhound bus to Tampa. Her family made several attempts to contact her, but when they hadn't had any word from Erica by the 14th of July, they decided to open a missing person case. It's believed that Erica eventually made it to Tampa, but any efforts to reach her by phone went unanswered. Investigators found it hard to try and track Erica down since she had no bank account. She didn't use her phone very often, and she had no social media accounts. Neither her family nor investigators understand why Erica would willingly disappear, but they do not believe that she's a victim of foul play. She would currently be 38 years old, and she's described as having brown hair with green eyes. She weighs around 130 pounds and stands 5 foot 8 inches tall. The last time she was seen on surveillance footage, Erica was wearing jeans and sneakers. She had a sweatshirt with her and a baseball cap on her head. No further leads have ever been found in Erica's case, and she remains a missing person to this day. Investigators have asked anyone who has information on Erica's disappearance to contact the Cape Coral Police Department at 238-574-3223. Erica's NamUs case number is MP93645. When a member of a tight-knit community goes missing, it can have a profound effect on the remaining members of that community, and it's often the case that they work together in an effort to find the missing person. And that's certainly the case in the disappearance of 30-year-old Clinton Lockyer from Western Australia. The last time that anyone had contact with Clinton was on the 31st of October 2022. When Clinton's family was informed that he was missing, they immediately joined in on the search for him, together with other members of the Roebourne community and police investigators who have asked members of the public to keep an eye out for it. To aid in the search, drones and off-road vehicles have been provided, but even with the use of these resources, Clinton has still not been found. The police also found CCTV security footage of Clinton in the Karratha area, in which he can be seen sitting on a low wall in front of a building, and he doesn't seem in any way distressed or in ill health. More footage was found of Clinton, where he can be seen walking next to a road in Karratha with a cup of coffee in his hand. At one point, he walks out of sight after crossing the road, and he's not been seen since. Police described Clinton as about 5 foot 5 inches tall with short black hair and brown eyes. He has a black beard and a medium build, and the last time he was seen, he was wearing tan-colored shorts, a black and red shirt, and flip-flops. He's also known to frequent the Carnarvon and Geraldton areas, and it's possible that he may be there or in Karratha or Roebourne. If you or anyone you know have information that could lead to Clinton being found, please contact the Karratha Police Department at 131-444. In January of 2022, 24-year-old Alicia Apostoloff-Boyarin was living with her great-grandfather in Greater Manchester in England. But on the 2nd of February of that year, she disappeared under suspicious circumstances, and she hasn't been in contact with her family since. And now, police fear the worst for Alicia and her family, as they've uncovered evidence that she may have come to harm or possibly have had her life ended by an older man who's believed to be familiar with her family. Investigators believe that Alicia and the man interacted with each other via social media, and that he then arranged to get her from Ashton. 2 men who became suspects in Alicia's case were arrested on 2 separate occasions, but the first, a 59-year-old man from County Durham, was released on bail, and the second, a 50-year-old man from Ashton-under-Lyne, was released while the investigation continues. CCTV footage from the 17th of January was released by police in which Alicia can be seen in an Asda supermarket, along with the man who's wearing a surgical face mask. They then leave the store together after using Alicia's card to pay, and her bank account has not been accessed since. Police also released a CCTV image showing Alicia in the passenger seat of a gold-colored Volkswagen Passat at a gas station. The man she was with filled the car with gas before setting off once again. Alicia was last spotted on the 22nd of January in Derbyshire. Police have asked members of the community to check their CCTV and dashcam footage in hopes that another sighting of Alicia may give them further clues as to where she is now or what may have happened to her. It's believed that at the time of her mysterious disappearance, Alicia was wearing a long jacket with a hood, and anyone with information on Alicia's case, who she was traveling with, or what may have happened to her, is asked to contact the police. When a friend or family member suddenly goes missing, it must be a very hard situation to deal with, but it must be even harder when that person mysteriously disappears in another country, which is what happened to 31-year-old David Holland. David originally hails from Swansea in Wales, but in 2022, he was working as a junior anesthetist in New Zealand. On the 11th of March, he told his friends that he was thinking of going for a swim at the beach, and he's not been seen since. When he didn't show up for his shift at work, his friends became concerned and he was reported as a missing person. Police, along with members of the community, conducted a thorough search of the beach, but their efforts were in vain, and David remains missing more than 12 months later. The Coast Guard notified all boat owners in the area to keep a lookout for any clues, and that they were to report any findings to the police, but this yielded no results. Drones, rescue dogs, and thermal imaging cameras were used in a search of more than 13 miles of coastline and the areas around his residence, but despite their best efforts, nothing of interest was found. CCTV security camera footage was then found of David in which he was walking on Sandhurst Drive at around 8 p.m. before turning onto Truman Lane and continuing on in the direction of State Highway 29A. In the footage, the man believed to be David is wearing a dark, long-sleeved hoodie with tan-colored pants and hiking boots. David was known to own these items of clothing, and when his house was searched, they were missing, further bolstering the theory that this is indeed David in the CCTV footage. This footage prompted another search, but this also proved unsuccessful. Despite receiving many leads from members of the public, David is yet to be found. David is known to have a love for cycling, ultimate frisbee, surfing, and the ocean in general. He still remains missing today, and anyone who may have seen him or who has any information that could further this case is asked to call 105, quoting case number 220312/6869. The mysterious disappearance of 29-year-old Jordan Taylor from New York occurred on the 6th of January 2023, and he has still not been located. At the time, Jordan was living in Queens, New York, where he shared a place with his brother while studying law. Before going missing, he had finished his first semester, sat his finals, and was eagerly waiting to receive his results. On the 6th of January, he visited a barber shop on Hillside Avenue, but while having his hair cut, he received a phone call and unexpectedly left at around 5 p.m. before his appointment was over. Jordan then lingered outside the barber shop for a few minutes before leaving. But during his time outside the shop, he changed his Facebook profile picture to a selfie that he took. His barber would later tell police that Jordan seemed a little bit off during the appointment. When his phone records were checked, they showed that Jordan was at the Port Authority bus terminal until around midnight, and that he was at a nightclub called The Q in Hell's Kitchen until 1 a.m. When he was reported missing, CCTV footage of the area was checked and Jordan was seen walking close to the Goldman Sachs building in Manhattan at around 2:30 a.m. But that was his last known whereabouts and he went missing. Police then received their first lead when Jordan's wallet and phone were handed in at different police stations. It was reported that his phone was found near the nightclub while his wallet was found outside the Goldman Sachs building. CCTV footage from outside the Q Club was checked, but investigators were unable to find any footage of Jordan. They were, however, able to recover footage of him outside the Goldman Sachs building, but they're baffled as to why these two items were found so far from each other. To add to the mystery of Jordan's case, all of his money and credit cards were found to still be in his wallet, and it seems unlikely that he was robbed, but it's equally as unlikely that he would have lost his phone and wallet in two separate locations on the same night. Police don't believe that Jordan has been the victim of foul play, but they have stated that they've not ruled this out as a possibility. Jordan is described as 5 foot 11 inches tall and weighing around 170 pounds. At the time of his disappearance, he was wearing a black and red sweater, a dark blue long-sleeved hoodie, black pants, and black sneakers. The New York Police Department has asked anyone with information on Jordan's whereabouts to contact them at 800-577-8477. Jordan's nameless case number is MP100125. Eden Huntington, a 28-year-old man from Mermaid Waters in Queensland, Australia, disappeared from Montville where he was visiting relatives, and police are now looking to speak to a woman who may have spoken to him before he went missing. On the day of his disappearance, Eden started feeling sick, and he called an ambulance to the holiday property where he was staying with his father. His dad would later state that he woke up at around 5 a.m. to find paramedics and the next-door neighbor in the house, but Eden had left the house before the ambulance arrived. The neighbor then told police that he saw Eden leaving the property hastily before paramedics got there. When his family attempted to contact him, they found that his phone had been turned off, which was highly out of character. Eden was reported as missing, and police searched the areas that he's known to frequent, but this turned up no further leads at the time. Then CCTV footage surfaced in which Eden is seen walking around a house barefoot in Montville, with a backpack on his back while smoking a cigarette. He's later seen in the day getting out of his gray 2013 Ford Territory in Montville before entering the same house. Strangely, he's seen talking on a cell phone, but since his cell phone was turned off, the phone in the footage may belong to someone else. He's then seen exiting the house, placing his backpack on the back seat of his car, getting behind the wheel and reversing out of the driveway. A witness would later tell investigators that they saw Eden's car parked in the middle of Montville's main street, and a woman who's being sought for questioning was seen about 300 feet from the car. The woman is described as being either in her late 30s or early 40s. She has long, dark hair, and at the time she was carrying a black bag while wearing a white shirt with maroon and purple shorts. In the CCTV footage, Eden is wearing a blue shirt, no shoes, and black shorts. He's described as around 5'7" tall, with brown hair and green eyes. He's also known to have tattoos on his upper and lower right arm. Australian authorities have asked anyone with information on Eden's case to contact the police at 131-444 or to make an online report by visiting police.qld.gov.au/reporting. 20 years on from his mysterious disappearance, the friends and family of Alex Ratnasothy are still searching for answers. Alex disappeared in Nepal during a year of traveling and adventures. The last known photo was taken at a hotel called the Annapurna Lodge, where Alex was staying with other travelers before beginning his climb to the Mount Everest base camp. The last time his family heard from Alex was February 21st, 2003, the same day the photo was taken. In an age before social media, he was keeping in contact with his family via email. Since April of the previous year, Alex had been traveling around the world. He had visited Australia, New Zealand, and many countries in Southeast Asia. Now he had just arrived in Kathmandu, Nepal. He planned to trek towards the Everest base camp, though doesn't appear to have had any ambitions of climbing the mountain itself. In his final email, he warned that he wouldn't be in contact with them for about a month, but he said he would be back before they knew it. He was scheduled to return home exactly a year after he left. A month came and went, and there was still no word from Alex. When he didn't catch his flight home, his family decided to investigate his disappearance. Alex's siblings traveled from England to Nepal to try to trace his steps. His sister stayed for 10 months and discovered something terrifying. Alex had been robbed while on the trek to the base camp. The thieves had taken his money, guitar, bag, and shoes, but Alex had survived the attack. He was spotted heading towards the Arun Valley and was highly distressed. He was seen asking for free food and accommodation. One person claimed to have seen Alex barricade himself in a hostel room. Alex didn't have his passport with him at the time of his disappearance. He'd left that at a trekking office so they could arrange a visa to Tibet, but it seems Alex collected that later and had been trying to arrange a flight to Dubai. Alex then left his passport at the travel kiosk, and from there, the trail went cold. Alex's friends and family hope he decided to start a new life in Asia. He only spoke English at the time of his disappearance, but was half Sri Lankan. His family believes it would have been easy for him to slip over the border and settle down in India or Tibet. If that's the case, they only ask that he reaches out and let them know that he's okay. Alex is described as being 5'10" tall. He had a large tattoo of a dragon on his right shoulder. Today, he would be 44 years old. Anybody with information on this case can contact Alex's sister, Anna, at annaratnasothy@hotmail.com. Ross Kinghorn was an avid hill walker who knew the Perthshire area pretty well. When he left his home in January of this year, he planned to climb the 3 peaks of Banahaw in 3 days. When Ross never returned, his partner reported him as a missing person. Ross was 57 years old when he vanished without a trace. He left his home on January 16th and was captured on CCTV boarding a train, heading towards Bridge of Tilt. This would be the last known photo of the missing man. No CCTV captured Ross leaving the train, but investigators soon found evidence that he made it to his destination and became lost in the mountains somewhere. In the final photo of Ross before he vanished, he could be seen pulling a bag behind him. Search teams located the bag and other items belonging to Ross near the Bridge of Tilt area. It's believed Ross had stored them there and was planning to come back for them after he had finished his climb. Ross's plan was to camp on Glen Tilt, then climb the 3 peaks of Banahaw over the next 3 days. But Ross apparently wasted no time once he was in the area. Even though temperatures were still below freezing at that time of year, there were a number of other hill walkers in the area, and Ross was spotted on 3 occasions on the afternoon of January 16th. The first was at the first summit of the 3 peaks. He was then spotted on the ridge near the 2nd peak. He was later seen on the summit of the 2nd peak. What Ross chose to do from there is unclear. He wasn't racing to get to all 3 peaks in just a single day, and may have descended from the 2nd peak and become lost. But he may have also pushed on and become lost somewhere between the 2nd summit and the 3rd. Ross's loved ones have urged hill walkers and hikers to keep a lookout for any sign of Ross. Even though he was experienced, accidents can happen to anybody, and something unpredictable may have happened. Ross is a white man, 5 foot 8 inches tall, of a slim build and with a bald head. When he disappeared, he was wearing a blue beanie, a waterproof jacket, a green fleece, gray walking pants, and brown boots. Anyone with information can contact Police Scotland on 101 with the reference 1588 of January 20. Immediately after Cyclone Gabriel hit New Zealand, there were thousands of people listed as unreachable by their friends and family. That number gradually dropped to 5. Among those was Joseph Auriri, who disappeared during the storm. But police believe his disappearance is not cyclone related. Joseph was last seen by his family on February 13, 2023. The 40-year-old father of 8 traveled from his home in Gisborne to Napier to visit a relative. He left at 4 p.m. and told his partner he would be back by 2 a.m. the following morning. But while Joseph was away, conditions worsened. The journey back to Gisborne would have taken Joseph along the coast and through places that were being washed away by the storm. He decided to check into a hotel in Napier to spend the night. He left the hotel at 4:28 a.m., taking his white Toyota Hilux and trying to brave the storm. At first, police believed he traveled south from the hotel. There was CCTV of Joseph's vehicle at Havelock North. When he was reported missing by his loved ones, the search focused on that area. The search in this missing person case was made extremely difficult by the storm. There were landslides and flooding that cut off roads and access to locations, and power cuts which limited the amount of CCTV which investigators had available. In March, new CCTV was uncovered, which led police to extend their search area. The CCTV was from a truck stop on the outskirts of Napier. It was located roughly 30 kilometers north of where Joseph was last spotted. At 5:46 a.m., Joseph is seen at a stop with his vehicle. He gets out and looks around the car, inspecting the front and back of it before the camera cuts out. At one point, a truck is seen driving from the back of the fuel stop and returning to the main road. Joseph's family was certain his disappearance was related to the storm. Flash flooding hit the Esk Valley area and a bridge over the river collapsed. It was on January 14th that a state of national emergency was declared in New Zealand. However, the police do not believe Joseph was the victim of the cyclone and have him listed as a missing person. Joseph did have links to organized crime, though how connected he was to this has never been revealed. It's possible Joseph met with some foul play rather than a natural disaster. Whichever is true, Joseph's family is desperate for answers. Anyone with information can contact the police on 105 and quote file number 230-225-2804. It's been 17 years since anybody saw or heard from Martin Kelly. The last known photo of him is a still from CCTV footage. It shows the then 21-year-old man walking through a car park along a riverfront. After he left the frame, he was never heard from again. The disappearance took place on January 1st, 2006. Martin and a group of friends had been drinking at Pat's Bar in Belfast. They'd come from Hollywood, County Down, and when the friends left at about 7 p.m., they piled into taxis to make the journey back. For some reason, Martin didn't get into the taxis. He returned to the bar 40 minutes later. He still wanted to get home, and the two men sitting at the bar had offered him a lift. Martin was apparently going to accept the offer, but received a call on a borrowed mobile phone. He didn't tell anybody what the call was about, but slipped out of a side exit of the bar and disappeared into the night. Pat's bar no longer exists, but it used to sit along the River Lagan. The exit Martin used was actually called the Clarendon Dock entrance. Martin was later picked up on CCTV walking along the riverfront. The docks were not an area that he was familiar with. It's not known what kind of attitude he had as he left the bar. It's possible he left after the phone call to go and meet up with someone, and was walking with a purpose. He also could have drunk a significant amount of alcohol and was simply wandering around the area. Police believe he likely fell into the river, which is extremely dangerous. But Martin's father believes he met with foul play after leaving the pub. Over the years, Martin's father has made numerous appeals for information. And in 2020, 2 people were brought in for questioning after a new tip emerged. The tip didn't lead anywhere though, and the truth remains a mystery. Martin is described as 6 foot 1 inches tall, of a slim build with short black hair. He was wearing a black Guinness branded t-shirt and blue jeans. Anyone with information can contact Crime Stoppers on 0800-555-111. The last known photo of Julian Varley shows a man walking away from a CCTV camera. He left in his car, which was also pictured on CCTV. When the car was next seen, it had been burned out and had bullet holes in the side. Julian remains missing. Julian worked full-time as a strawberry picker in New Zealand. This was in a rural area in the Bay of Plenty region, known primarily for its orchards, and in 2019, it made headlines due to avocado thieves. The work kept Julian somewhat isolated from his family, but he was still very emotionally close to them. He had a wife and 2 children under the age of 10, and another on the way. According to Julian's mother, he adored his children and was looking forward to the new addition. The last thing anybody expected was for Julian to just disappear. The exact details of Julian's disappearance aren't clear, but he was last seen at about 3 p.m. on January 23, 2020. The sighting came in the form of CCTV, which captured Julian in his blue and silver 1998 Nissan Pulsar at the roundabout on State Highway 29A. Or at least his car was captured on CCTV. In the image released to the press, it's hard to see inside the car, but the police seem to believe Julian was behind the wheel. 10 hours later, a passerby spotted a car on fire near Highway 36. This would have been roughly an hour's drive from where Julian's car was last spotted. The police arrived to a very strange sight. Not only had the car been set alight, but the police also found bullet holes in the side of the vehicle. A forensic examination took place, but it could not uncover what had happened to the car's owner. Julian was reported as a missing person by his loved ones not long after. It was very unusual for him to disappear without telling anyone. The fact that his vehicle was found in such a state only added to the worry. A search of the area near where Julian's vehicle was found took place, but no trace of him could be found. In the weeks after Julian's disappearance, police published another image of the missing man. It was a still from a CCTV camera, which showed Julian walking away from the camera. He was wearing a red tie-dye shirt, a black hat, and beige shorts. He was also seen carrying a dark jacket or sweatshirt. Julian's family has received tips about what happened to him, but foul play is only listed as a possibility. His bank account was last active at 2:40 a.m. on January 23rd. His phone also hasn't been active since Julian vanished. Anybody with information on the case can contact the investigating team at 07-577-4384. One of the most infamous and mysterious missing person cases in Sri Lankan history is that of Upali Wijwadeen and the 5 others aboard his Learjet 35A. Few other mysterious disappearances have had such an impact on a nation, and his case needs to be solved. Upali was a multi-millionaire, successful businessman, and rising through the political ranks when he vanished without a trace on February 13, 1983. Upali first made his money in confectionery and was a self-made millionaire by the age of 26. He created Sri Lanka's first multinational business, and his products were popular in Malaysia and Singapore. The business expanded to include car assembly, air travel, and newspaper publication. When he entered his 40s, Upali's focus turned to politics. He had a lot of close relations in politics. His cousin was President J.R. Jayawarden, and he was married to the niece of a former prime minister. While he was a very popular individual, there are mixed reports about how well he did in politics. He definitely made some enemies, and his business approach to politics wasn't liked by everyone. But he was steadily rising through the ranks, and shortly before his unsolved disappearance, he was invited to take the role of finance minister. Not everyone was happy with the appointment. In the confirmation hearing, the prime minister declared, "I curse that man." Just a few weeks later, that curse would come true. Before Upali took up the post, he had traveled to Singapore and Malaysia for business. The plan was for him to become finance minister the day after his return. Business went well, and on the evening of February 13th, he began the return journey to Sri Lanka. It was 8:41 p.m. local time when Upali's Learjet 35A took off from Subang Airport in Malaysia. As well as Upali, aboard was the pilot and co-pilot, a steward, Upali's group director, and a Malaysian lawyer. At 8:52, the pilot requested permission to climb to 8,230 meters. Radars reported that the plane was traveling at 744 kilometers per hour and everything seemed to be under control. That was until 10 minutes later, at 9:02 p.m. The aircraft suddenly sped up to 1,352 kilometers per hour and disappeared from the radar. Air traffic control could not establish radio communication, and all contact with the jet was lost. The Learjet was supposed to arrive at Colombo, Sri Lanka at 9:45 p.m., but that didn't happen. An investigation into the mysterious disappearance was launched. Assistance came from the United States, Soviet Union, Australia, Indonesia, India, and Malaysia. An American Orion spy plane and Indonesian minesweepers were even involved in the search, but no trace of the plane was recovered. On February 21st, a wheel was located near the Pendang Islands. At first, it was thought to be from the missing plane, and the search was focused there. It was later discovered to not be from the Learjet. There were also reports of Indonesian fishermen who had been out the night of Upali's strange disappearance. They reported a red flash of light in the sky, and the next day found evidence of a plane crash. The reports came late though and could not be verified. What happened to Upali and the 5 others in his jet that night remains a mystery. While it's almost certain that he's no longer alive, why this plane came down and where it is now remain unanswered questions that need to be solved. It was the middle of the night when Ashley Porter left through her bedroom window. She hasn't been seen or heard from since, and her mysterious disappearance may be the result of foul play. Ashley was 22 years old in April of 2009. She had graduated from high school 2 years earlier and worked manufacturing jobs. She lived at home in Gastonia, North Carolina with her mother and stepfather. She'd never been in any trouble with the law and always respected her mother's house rules. According to her family, she didn't drink much or use illegal substances. Her mother said that if she did do those things, she did it out of the house. The day of April 19th was like any other. That morning, the family went to church, and later that day, Ashley spent time on the internet and logged into her MySpace page. She went to visit a neighbor and was home by 10 p.m. At 10, she told her mother goodnight and headed up to her bedroom. The following day was a Monday. Ashley's mother wanted to use a coat that was in her closet, so she knocked on Ashley's bedroom door. When she didn't get an answer, she tried the door only to find it was locked. Ashley's stepfather was eventually able to get the door open. The couple found Ashley's bedroom empty. It's not known if her bed had been slept in, but the window screen lied on the floor, and the bedroom window was open. All of Ashley's belongings, including her purse and cell phone, were found inside the room. This was something that had never happened before, at least to Ashley's parents' knowledge. but they didn't worry straight away. It was out of character for her, but they told themselves she must have gone to visit a friend and forgotten to call. Days passed, and there was still no news from Ashley. On April 27th, she was finally reported as a missing person. Police taking the missing person report didn't believe there was anything wrong. It looked like a voluntary disappearance, but like Ashley's parents, they changed their mind as time progressed. It's now believed she met with foul play. Ashley's case remains a mystery. She didn't have any known enemies, but her mother did admit that Ashley had an ex-boyfriend who had physically hurt her in the past. This ex was not welcome at their home, and she speculated that he or someone else might have gone to Ashley's window because he knew that he wouldn't get through the front door. If this is the case, why Ashley would go with him isn't clear. Ashley was 5 foot 3 inches tall and weighed 140 to 150 pounds. She had black hair and brown eyes. She wore prescription glasses, but those too had been left behind when she vanished. Anyone with information that could help solve this missing person case can contact Gastonia Police Department at 704-866-6702. Jennifer Shadles disappeared in extremely suspicious circumstances more than 8 years ago. A slow response from the police may mean that this missing person case is never solved. Jennifer was a 48-year-old mother of 3 when she vanished in May of 2014. She was going through the process of a divorce from her husband, Sean, and was getting to the end of the process. It had not been an easy process for Jennifer. She had been the one to move out of the family home and stayed with her mother for a while. It was 40 minutes away from where her soon-to-be ex-husband and children lived, though. After a short while, she moved back to the State College, Pennsylvania area, and had tried to stay in hotels or with friends as she didn't have a permanent residence. A few months before Jennifer vanished, her estranged husband, Sean Shadles, was ordered by a judge to pay her $5,000 a month in alimony. On the day of Jennifer's disappearance, May 15th, she spoke with her daughter on the phone. Jennifer didn't go a day without speaking to her youngest daughter. She was last seen on CCTV at a Walmart just before 5 p.m. A few days passed and Jennifer's family realized that something was wrong. They couldn't get through to her and had no knowledge of where she might have gone. They tried contacting the police, but the police didn't take the missing person case at first. It wasn't until 30 days had passed from Jennifer's last sighting that they finally began the investigation. All of Jennifer's belongings were located. She didn't have a cell phone or any money with her when she vanished without a trace. Suspicion fell on Sean, but he claimed Jennifer had an alcohol problem and had gone to a rehabilitation center. This would turn out to not be true. He took a lie detector test, but it came back inconclusive. A later search of his home turned up no evidence that could solve this missing person case. Jennifer's family took the investigation into their own hands with private investigators. They found that the last known sighting of Jennifer was actually between 7 and 8 p.m. on May 15th. She had gone to a tanning store, claiming that she lost her wallet. The owner and 2 employees had helped her search for it. After her family told the police, it took a while for them to interview the employees. There was no CCTV available. Jennifer's bank account hadn't been touched since her disappearance, and her case remains unsolved. Jennifer was 5'4" when she disappeared and weighed between 105 and 115 pounds. She was wearing a light-colored t-shirt, capri pants, and was carrying a black shoulder bag. Anyone with information should contact Ferguson Township Police Department at 814-237-1172 or submit a tip at their local FBI office. Julie Cutler's disappearance is one of the strangest missing person mysteries in Australia. Her family was told the case may never be solved. Julie was 22 years old when she vanished without a trace in the early hours of June 20th, 1988. She was a bright young woman who worked in housekeeping at Parmelia Hilton Hotel in Perth. At the time, it was one of only 2 5-star hotels in Perth. The night of June 19th was a celebration at the hotel. Julie spent the day working a shift, then changing out of her work uniform into a black gown for a staff awards event being held in the hotel's function room. Nobody there noticed anything out of the ordinary. At one point, she and a coworker, Consuelo Harper, were considering going back to the flat of another coworker. But when Consuelo decided she didn't want to go, Julie decided not to go as well. Julie was last seen leaving the hotel at 12:30 a.m. on June 20th. She got into her gray Fiat sedan and left the parking lot. She was last seen turning left onto Mount Bay Road. It was June 21st when Julie was reported missing. Her flatmate, Fiona Marr, contacted Julie's family when she didn't come home the previous day. Her family was unable to get in contact with her and called the police. The next day, Julie's car would be discovered on Coatslow Beach. It was resting on its roof halfway between the Groin and Coatslow Surf Club. It was badly damaged, and police determined that it had been driven off or pushed off a retaining wall, rather than on the groin. Julie's body was not found in the car. Other personal items were missing, including her shoes and handbag. Interestingly, still in the car were champagne flutes and cigarette filters from a brand of cigarettes that Julie didn't smoke. A year later, a bag containing a Hilton uniform and black pantyhose was handed in to the police. It was discovered around the time of Julie's disappearance at a kebab shop, 5 minutes from the hotel. The staff there hadn't realized that it was significant. Also handed in years after the event was a purse and diary discovered in the sand dunes a kilometer south of where Julie's car was discovered. It was found 8 years after she vanished and handed in to the police in 1997, when the man who found them learned of Julie's disappearance. Police initially dismissed the evidence and it was destroyed before forensic testing could take place. Afterward, police searched the dunes for any more evidence but turned up nothing. An inquest into Julie's disappearance was unable to answer the question of what happened to her. It's assumed she's no longer alive, but whether that was due to her own hand, foul play, or a tragic accident has never been solved. Lisa Jameson disappeared just hours after telling her family that she thought she was pregnant again. More than 30 years later, the son she left behind is still searching for answers in this missing person case that needs to be solved. Lisa was 23 years old and worked at an electronics business in Chandler, Arizona, when she went missing in November of 1991. At the time, she was living in nearby Gilbert with her husband Alan and her 18-month-old son from a previous relationship, Kyle. There are no details about what that relationship was like, but Alan was happy not to have any more children. So when Lisa told her parents at a family gathering that she was pregnant, she also told them she was scared about telling Alan. Her family told her that he needed to know. That was November 3rd, 1991. It's not clear if Lisa saw Alan before she disappeared. He worked as a guard at the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. She worked an overnight shift at Mote Electronics. Her shift that night went as normal. Afterward, she gave a coworker a lift home. She dropped off her coworker near the McQueen Road and Chandler Boulevard at 7:15 a.m. This was the last time that she was seen before she vanished without a trace. Lisa was reported missing later that day. Alan called Lisa's family when she didn't return home and said that she hadn't picked Kyle up from the babysitter. Local law enforcement told her family they would have to wait 72 hours before filing a missing person report. Even then, it seemed like the case wasn't taken as seriously as it needed to be. Lisa's red 1989 Pontiac was found on December 3rd in Phoenix. It had been parked outside of an adult bookstore. There are mixed reports about the state of Lisa's car. Most reports claim there was little evidence found in the car and no clues that could lead police to solving this strange mystery. A few reports say that there were obvious signs of a struggle, including a footprint on the ceiling of the car, a brown stain in the back seat, and a red fingernail. It seems likely the former is the case and there was little information for the police to go on. Lisa's family suspected Alan had something to do with Lisa's disappearance. A few years after she vanished, Alan moved back to Bolivia, where his family was from. Kyle was adopted by Lisa's parents. Since 1991, there have been no clues in the investigation. Lisa's family doesn't believe she would have disappeared by herself, and she left behind all the personal items that she would need to start a new life. They believe someone knows what happened to her, and anyone with information in this case should contact the Gilbert Police Department at 480-508-6500. In March of 2021, the FBI announced that it was searching for 3 women from Texas who had vanished in Mexico days earlier. After an initial flurry of attention, the case has since gone cold. Blasa Guadalupe Palomo was 38 years old when she went missing on March 3, 2021. She owned a body sculpting business in Laredo, Texas. The business itself didn't have the necessary licenses to operate, but it was still fairly popular. Among the staff, there was another 38-year-old woman named Perla Ercia. Like Blasa, Perla was born in Mexico but lived in Texas. She had 3 children at the time of her disappearance, including a newborn baby. On March 3, 2021, Blasa, Perla, and Blasa's 18-year-old daughter took a trip to Mexico. Blasa's daughter shared her mother's name but had the nickname of Lupita. The official reason for the visit was that Perla had an eye infection and needed to see a doctor there to sort it out. At approximately 3 p.m., their Toyota Corolla crossed the border into Nuevo Laredo. Neither it nor the 3 women would ever be seen again. There was no reason to believe that the women were planning an extended trip to Mexico. In fact, Lupita had left behind medication that she needed to take daily, suggesting that the trip was supposed to be brief. Both Perla and the elder Blasa also left behind small children. It was days after their disappearance that the FBI announced it was searching for the 3 women. The FBI believes that the 3 women may have been kidnapped, though it's not known if that's based on any specific evidence or simply due to the location where they vanished. Investigators refused to tell local media outlets whether the family had received any ransom demand for the women. Since the initial announcement, there's been little attention on the case and few updates. The senior Blasa Palomo is described as being 5'3" and weighing 200 pounds. She has long black hair, a Medusa tattoo on her shoulder, and a snake tattoo on her forearm. Her daughter was 5'3" and weighed 150 pounds when they vanished. Her hair had a black-blue ombre style. Perla is described as having short, dark, curly hair, being 5'5" and weighing 250 pounds. She has a tattoo of an infinity sign on her left wrist. Anyone with information on the case should contact the FBI San Antonio Division at 210-225-6741. Angela Green was last seen by her daughter on June 19, 2019. It wasn't until months later that her loved ones realized she was actually missing. Local law enforcement brought in the FBI to help in this strange missing person case. Angela was 51 years old when she vanished without a trace. The last confirmed sighting of her was with her 18-year-old daughter at their home in Prairie Village, Kansas. Her daughter, Ellie, had just returned home from studying abroad in Italy, and her newfound independence was causing tension between herself and her mother. On June 19th, the mother and daughter got into an argument. In the heat of the moment, Angela told Ellie to move out if she didn't need her anymore. Ellie left the house and went to stay with her boyfriend for a few days. During that time, there were no calls or texts from Angela. After trying to get a hold of her mother, Ellie got a text from her father, Jeff. Jeff claimed that he'd had Angela put in a mental hospital after a mental breakdown. He wouldn't give any information about Angela's illness or the hospital where she was staying. Weeks went by and Ellie continued to ask questions about her mother. Then on July 16th, Jeff broke some terrible news. Angela had suffered a stroke at the hospital and passed away. He asked Ellie not to tell Angela's family so that he could have some time to grieve privately. Ellie was naturally devastated. She respected her father's wishes, but months passed and there was no funeral or obituary. In February of 2020, Ellie finally contacted her mother's sister, who demanded a death certificate. When no certificate could be produced, Angela was finally reported as a missing person. The police visited Jeff's home and suddenly his story changed. Now Angela was alive, but she'd gone away with friends and he didn't know where she was. At this point, the strange missing person case definitely seemed sinister. Angela was classified as endangered, and 2 properties owned by Jeff were searched. Angela's passport, driver's license, purse, and phone were all located, but there was nothing to explain what had happened to Angela after she disappeared. Most of Angela's family lived in China, and many of the neighbors had assumed that she'd gone back to China when they hadn't spotted her for a while. It was confirmed she hadn't left the country. Angela is still officially classified as a missing person, and the FBI is involved in investigating this strange case. More than 150 tips have been called in, but law enforcement has continued to appeal for information. Angela is described as a Chinese American with brown hair and eyes. She was 5'9" and 119 pounds when she disappeared. Anyone with information can contact the Prairie Village Police Department at 913-642-6868. There's also a GoFundMe set up by her family. More than 27 years ago, James Ruland vanished in extremely mysterious circumstances. His siblings have continued the push for answers during that time, and now the FBI has joined the investigation in this strange missing person case. James was 40 years old when he was last seen. He was in the process of moving out of the house that he shared with a man named Jeremy Beyer, and had another home lined up in Kiel, Wisconsin with a new roommate. James had 2 young children, but was divorced from their mother. He remained close to his family, especially his siblings, and kept in touch with his parents who lived in Florida. Possibly in preparation for that move, James bought a new car in mid-October of 1995 and asked his parents to send $2,500. They mailed a check on October 16th, but James would never cash it. The days leading up to James's disappearance seemed normal. He went to church on October 22nd and was last seen by his co-workers 2 days later. But according to the FBI, the very last sighting of James was on October 26th. He was hitchhiking in North Fond du Lac, a town halfway between Ripon and Kiel. By November 4th, James's family had realized he was missing. He hadn't collected his paycheck 2 days earlier, and none of them had heard from him in over a week. He was reported missing, and the investigation into his disappearance began. James's new vehicle couldn't be located. It wasn't until November 14th that it was finally found at Stretch Truck Stop near North Fond du Lac. The keys were still in the ignition, and James's belongings were still in the cargo space. It looked as if he'd been in the process of moving his belongings to his new home. It's not known if there were any mechanical problems with the car, but investigators did find evidence that led them to believe something strange had happened. The first piece of evidence was cigars found in the front of the vehicle. James didn't smoke. The second was blood found on one of the car's tires. In 1995, a forensic examination would have required the full sample to be tested. Investigators didn't want to risk losing the evidence, so they held off on testing it. Instead, they looked at other clues that could indicate what had happened. James's roommate, Beyer, had cashed the check James's parents sent. He also used another check issued to James to pay a bill. He was arrested and charged with fraud, but there was no evidence linking him to James's disappearance. Over the years, multiple searches have taken place in areas around where James disappeared and at his Ripon home, but no new evidence has been uncovered. The FBI is now appealing for information that could help solve this case. James was 6 feet tall and weighed 160 pounds when he vanished. He had a shunt implant from a wound sustained when he was young. Some sources also state that he had a metal plate in his head. Anybody with information in this case can contact their local FBI office or Fond du Lac Sheriff's Department at 920-929-3390. Denise Deneau was last seen more than 40 years ago, leaving a nightclub in Manchester, New Hampshire. Despite the FBI recently getting involved to crack this case, it remains cold. Denise was last seen in the early morning hours of June 18, 1980. The following morning, she was reported missing by her roommate when she didn't return home. At the time of her disappearance, Denise was a single mother of 2 sons. Her ex-husband, Paul, had been causing custody issues around the time that Denise vanished, but she had custody of her 2 sons who were just 6 and 4 years old at the time. The night of June 7th was one of Denise's few nights to herself. The 25-year-old went out socializing at the Merrimack Club. She stayed until the early hours of the last morning and was seen leaving the club at 1:30 a.m. 2 men who spoke to her as she left reported that she was going to another party. The following day, with no sign of Denise, her roommate, Tamara Levy, reported her as missing. It was extremely out of character for her. While she was having some issues, including a recent breakup and some debt problems, she would have never abandoned her son. After an initial investigation into her strange disappearance, Tamara's case went cold. At one point, the case file was lost, and it wasn't until 2017 that the investigation was picked up again. Now, there were a number of other cases Denise might have been connected to. At the time of Denise's disappearance, she lived on the same street as a man named Terry Rasmussen. In 2003, Rasmussen pleaded guilty to taking the life of his wife. Police believed he may have been involved in taking the lives of 5 other people as well. While there's no evidence linking him to Denise's disappearance, the proximity leaves people wondering if she may have been another victim. Unfortunately, Rasmussen passed away behind bars in 2010, taking any information he may have had to his grave. In 2017, the FBI joined local law enforcement in a dig after a tip pointed to a wooded area 2.5 miles from where Denise was last seen. Sniffer dogs were brought in to aid the investigation, but nothing was uncovered. Denise's case remains unsolved. Information in this case can be passed on to the Manchester Police Department at 603-338-8711. Ella Goody was last seen by her teenage daughters on March 9, 2022. She told them that she was driving a rideshare customer to Houston, Texas, and that she would be back that evening. She never returned home, and her case remains unsolved. It was a few days before Ella was reported missing. Her best friend, Felicia, had last spoken to her the day before her disappearance. When her calls went unanswered for 2 days, she got in touch with Ella's family, who confirmed they hadn't spoken to her. On March 11th, Ella was reported as a missing person. Ella's car, a black 2015 Audi Q5, was also missing. At the start of the year, Ella had begun working for the rideshare app Lyft. She also had customers who didn't use the app. It was one of these customers who'd requested a ride to Houston on the day of Ella's disappearance. As friends and family put up missing person flyers and set up a Facebook page dedicated to finding Ella, police managed to track down her car. It was spotted on traffic cameras on March 9th, heading into Texas. 12 hours later, it was spotted heading back in the opposite direction, but Ella would never complete that trip. Strangely, the following day, the car was spotted again in Dallas. The car then vanished from cameras, but was located on April 1st in St. Joseph, Missouri. Also in St. Joseph was a man named Brandon Francisco. Francisco is believed to be the last rideshare customer who Ella picked up. He was arrested in St. Joseph for a separate case. He later pleaded guilty to attempting to take the life of another motorist and stealing his car. In October, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Francisco remains classified as a person of interest in Ella's missing person case, which is now being investigated by the FBI as well as local law enforcement. Ella's friends and family continue to hold on to hope that they'll soon get answers in this disturbing case. Anybody with information in the case should contact the Louisiana State Police Department at 318-484-2194. Disappearance of Christine Licorice McKechnie is one shrouded in mystery. There are few solid details about what happened to the folk singer, or where she might be today. Licorice was born in Edinburgh, Scotland in October of 1945. She was a talented singer-songwriter and just the right age to be drawn in by the flower child hippie music scene in the 1960s. When she was in her late teens, she moved to the US to marry her boyfriend, but the marriage never happened. Instead, she began dating another musician named Robin Williamson and joined the band known as the Incredible String Band. The ISB would be described as folk rock or early British psychedelia music and claimed the likes of Paul McCartney as fans. The band was having some success in the US and performed at Woodstock, but it was bumped from Friday's lineup of mostly folk bands to the electric music-focused Saturday. It didn't get the attention it might otherwise have had and was missing from the official film about the event. Despite the issues at Woodstock, the band continued for some years. Many of the members, including Licorice, joined the Church of Scientology, and many of the church's beliefs started to appear in song lyrics. What happened within the church is one of the biggest mysteries in this unsolved case. Some rumors state Licorice was the first of the ISB members to complete the first level of the church's training. Others say she became dissatisfied with Scientology and left. Licorice left the ISB in 1972 after breaking up with Williamson. She later dated a man named David Zeman, who was an ordained minister of the Church of Scientology in 1974. The relationship apparently didn't last, as she later married another musician named Brian Lambert. They divorced in the 1980s. Little else is known for certain about Licorice. It's believed she traveled to California and lived there for a few years. There are unverified reports that she worked as a waitress in the state. The last reported sighting of Licorice was in Arizona in 1990. She was apparently hitchhiking through the desert. After that, she apparently disappeared without a trace. Some believe Licorice is simply hiding in plain sight in California, living a normal life out of the limelight. There are some theories that she's trying to hide from the church, which doesn't take kindly to members leaving. The fact her family hasn't heard from her since the 80s, and that she hasn't claimed her royalty checks from the ISB is also worrying. Some believe she passed away while hitchhiking and may be a Jane Doe, waiting for identification. If alive today, Licorice would be 77 years old. Angel Manchito Cruz was once one of the most talented basketball players to never make it to the NBA. He had a successful career competing in Puerto Rico, where he was a local hero but vanished without a trace during his retirement. Angel grew up in New York, where he dedicated his life to perfecting his basketball skills. He was often one of the shortest players on the court, but that didn't seem to hinder him. His talent earned him a spot on the Indios de Canovanas team in Puerto Rico by the time he was 18. For the next 26 years, Angel impressed both on and off the court. He played point guard and had a career average of 14.8 points and 4.8 assists per game. His teammates described him as a natural leader and could sometimes be seen as a second coach on the court. During his career, he represented Puerto Rico on an international stage, including at the 1988 Olympics in Seoul. Off the court, he was described as laid back and always willing to stop for fans. He enjoyed traveling and collected pens from every city he visited. He was married 3 times and had 5 children. In 1993, Angel retired from the sport and moved back to New York. Adjusting to life after basketball was difficult for Angel, and he developed a problem with illegal substances. Not much information is known about Angel's life at this time, but by 1997, he seemed to be trying to make amends. He moved back to Puerto Rico, moving back in with his ex-wife for the first time in 5 years. He may have been trying to start a new career as a coach or manager, and was supportive of his son, Alvin, who looked set to follow in his father's footsteps and become a basketball star. But Angel was still struggling with addiction. It caused arguments between himself and his ex-wife, and Angel was concerned about his issues causing problems for Alvin. The last time his children saw him was in May of 1998. He had advised Alvin to sign for the Los Vaqueros basketball team, which he did. 2 weeks after signing, Alvin came home from practice with a twisted ankle. Angel left the house to get ice for Alvin's wound, but never came home. It's believed Angel traveled back to New York and may have signed up for a rehabilitation program, but never completed it. Some sources state that he was in touch with his parents for the next few years before disappearing entirely. Today, Angel's friends and family have no idea where he is or what happened to him. Elaine Can was a French singer who disappeared without a trace in 1990. The disappearance came 11 years after he released the album Whatever Happened to Elaine Z. Can, a question that has never been answered. Elaine disappeared on April 14, 1990. His partner Hubert dropped him off at a Paris metro station. He was in a rush and quickly disappeared into the station. It would only be 3 stops for Elaine to reach his apartment, but he never arrived. His stepsister and closest friend, Veronica, was alerted to his disappearance a few days later, but it wouldn't get much attention from the authorities. Elaine had lived a chaotic life up until that point, and it seemed likely that he would turn up, but he never would. Elaine had been recording music since he was a teenager. His music career was put on hold for his military service, and after he returned to civilian life, he realized he would need to make a change to get back into the limelight. He performed in late-night cabarets as an androgynous singer. It's somewhat unsurprising that after watching David Bowie in London, Elaine changed his art style once again to mimic the British singer. He produced 2 albums in this glam rock style and ended up in trouble with the police for producing songs that glamorized illegal substances. He would later reimagine himself again, this time producing music in the punk genre. All the while, Elaine was struggling with illegal substances himself and living an erratic lifestyle. He could not support himself with his music, but seemed to live life like a rock star. Veronica tried to look after him, but it wasn't an easy task. That was especially the case after Hubert came onto the scene. Hubert was as chaotic as Elaine and didn't help Elaine with his struggles. In particular, Veronica's husband didn't like Hubert and kicked both him and Elaine out of his home. Veronica tried to get her brother to stay, but he refused. It wasn't long after that Elaine disappeared. No trace of Elaine was ever found. Hubert's story changed multiple times, but he was cleared of any wrongdoing. Many suspect Elaine took his own life, though nobody saw this happen, and his body has never been found. The truth may never be uncovered, and we may never be able to answer the question of whatever happened to Elaine Z. Can. Actor Julian Sands disappeared without a trace while out hiking in San Gabriel Mountains in January of 2023. Almost 3 months later, he still hasn't been found. Most people recognize Julian today from his film and TV roles. He first found fame in the film A Room with a View and moved to Hollywood to continue his acting career. But in his hometown of Gargrave, England, he was known as much for his hiking as he was for his acting. Julian was an avid hiker. According to his brother, it was in the hills and mountains that he felt at home, and he would go hiking in the Yorkshire Dales whenever he was back in the UK. He had climbed mountains like the Matterhorn and Eiger. When he was back in Los Angeles, the Mount Baldy mountain range was his favorite place to be. Even in his 60s, Julian stayed active. In 2022, he walked an average of over 30 miles a day. Mount Baldy was a mountain he was familiar with, but heading up to the 10,000-foot mountain in the winter was extremely dangerous. It wasn't uncommon for search and rescue teams to be sent out to rescue even experienced hikers in the winter months. According to his friends, Julian would have seen that as a challenge though, and in January he left his LA home to try to summit the mountain. On the evening of January 13th, 2023, Julian's wife reported him as missing. A search began immediately, but poor weather conditions in Southern California meant ground searches had to be halted for safety reasons. Instead, search teams used technology that could trace electronic devices and credit cards, hoping to find some trace of Julian so they could focus their efforts when the weather cleared. It was discovered that Julian's phone pinged a number of times over the next 2 days before going silent. It had likely run out of battery. Ground searches resumed after a few weeks, but in March the area had to be completely closed due to risk of avalanches. So far, Julian still hasn't been found. Authorities say they might not get the answer they're hoping for in this missing person case, but they're dedicated to locating Julian and finding closure for his loved ones. Willie Copen has been described as Australia's first celebrity chef. He had a successful restaurant, a TV show, and a celebrity endorsement deal with Heinz. But in 1976, he vanished without a trace and hasn't been seen since. Willie was 46 years old at the time of his disappearance. He had grown up in Germany, where he had apprenticed at high-quality restaurants. In 1956, he moved to Melbourne, believing the cosmopolitan Australian city would be the perfect place to make a name for himself. While there, he met fellow German expat Karen and married her 2 years later. With Karen, Willie went from strength to strength. The couple opened their own restaurant called The Cuckoo, which was highly successful. Willie came into the spotlight first on the radio, but soon he had his own nightly cooking show, which aired before the evening news. From the outside, things looked great, but everything wasn't as it seemed. The Copens' marriage was in trouble. Both Willie and Karen were having affairs, and Karen had surrounded herself with people who weren't fond of Willie. He moved into a separate apartment at the bottom of his property and told Karen he wanted to sell the restaurant and move to a rural dairy farm. He was also drinking heavily. The last time Willie was seen before he vanished was in the early hours of the morning on Sunday, February 29, 1976. The evening before, he had arrived at the restaurant extremely drunk and apparently ready for a fight. He threatened to fire a number of waitstaff and accused Karen of having an affair with a doctor and the doctor's girlfriend. The doctor in question, Bernard Butler, wasn't at the restaurant at the time, but caught wind of the accusation and arrived not long after. Butler was one of Karen's friends, but he sat with Willie and calmed him down. The two drank together until the early hours of the morning, when Butler took Willie back to his doctor's clinic. According to Butler, he continued drinking for a while before Willie received a mysterious phone call and left. He's never been seen or heard from again. Later that morning, a cleaner found Willie's van parked outside the restaurant, but not in the location Willie normally parked. It was partially hidden from view, and the keys were still in the ignition. The door to the kitchen was also open, which was very unusual. There was no sign of Willie anywhere. It would be a few days before Willie was reported missing, and at first, the case wasn't taken seriously. The police believed this was some kind of stunt by the celebrity chef, and he would reappear soon. But it became clear that wasn't the case. Both the cleaner and a local police officer reported seeing a dark-colored American-style car parked outside the restaurant, with a light-colored van following close behind. It's not known if the car or van had anything to do with Willie's disappearance, but the drivers have also never come forward to clear themselves. Willie's children and investigators believe someone took his life that night. If Karen knew anything about her husband's disappearance, she took those secrets to her grave in 2022. The case remains unsolved. Louis Jordan was an extremely inexperienced sailor, heading out into the open ocean for the first time when he disappeared in January of 2015. After a search turned up no clues as to what happened to him, nobody could have expected he would have turned up alive more than 2 months later. Louis was a 37-year-old man living aboard his sailboat that was docked in Conway, South Carolina. His sailboat was a 1960s-era vessel with a single mast, and it was clear to all just how much Louis loved it. The marina manager described seeing Louis spend months sanding and painting his boat. Despite his love for the boat, he was extremely inexperienced when it came to actually sailing. He'd spent some time in the intercoastal waterways, but even there, he was just learning the ropes. In late January, Louis decided he was ready to go on his first trip out into the open water. Even for an experienced sailor, it would have been a dangerous endeavor. Weather conditions also weren't optimal for Louis. He said it looked like the weather would be good, but forecasts predicted some heavy storms. Louis set out on January 23rd, heading for Cape Hatteras. 6 days later, his parents contacted authorities. They hadn't heard from him for a week, and even though he had told them about his plan, they were worried that he hadn't checked in with them. Another week passed and Louis was confirmed as missing. The US Coast Guards set out to try to find the missing person, and sailors were alerted from New Jersey to Miami. There were a few reported sightings of Louis, but none could be confirmed. He also hadn't told anybody where he was planning to go, so the search area was too large for an effective search. After 10 days, the search was called off. Louis's parents claimed they never gave up hope that he would survive. But as weeks turned into months, it looked more and more likely like he was no longer alive. 66 days after Louis went missing, his family got the call they had been hoping for. A German cargo vessel had spotted a man standing on a small sailboat about 200 miles off the coast of North Carolina. It was Louis. Early on his trip, his boat capsized while he was sleeping. The mast broke and Louis suffered from a broken collarbone. The boat managed to right itself, but the communications equipment had broken, and Louis had no way of controlling the ship. He explained that he survived by using his clothing to fish and collecting rainwater. He spent as much time as possible in the cabin to avoid sunburn, but had managed to attract the attention of the German ship. Louis was brought aboard the cargo vessel before being airlifted to the hospital. Miraculously, he was in good condition and was able to walk out not long after, as one of the luckiest men to get lost at sea. After over a year of not knowing, the family and friends of Nollaig O'Connor finally solved the mystery of what happened to her in one of the most unexpected of ways. Nollaig had last been in contact with her family in May of 2013, telling them that she was going traveling. She was last seen in Cornwall, England. The search for Nollaig would take her family across Europe until she was finally found by a family friend on vacation. Nollaig was a 37-year-old woman from Northern Ireland. She was one of 8 siblings and was described as deeply religious. She was also a keen musician, able to play a variety of instruments as well as sing. Shortly before she vanished, she was diagnosed with some mental health problems, but that didn't appear to be getting in the way of her living her life. She was living in Aberdeen, Scotland at the time of her disappearance, but said she was going to go traveling. At first, Nollaig's family didn't realize she hadn't been in contact with any of them. Her siblings all assumed at least one of them had been able to keep in touch with her. But when Christmas came and nobody received any messages from her, they knew something was wrong. Police were able to trace Nollaig to Cornwall in the south of England. At the end of May, she was caught on CCTV taking money from an ATM and doing some grocery shopping. After that, she vanished without a trace. Nollaig's family started a social media campaign to try to find their missing loved one. Her missing person case was featured on TV and radio news, and sightings were called in from across the UK and Europe. It seemed as if she had managed to get to the continent, but had then run into trouble there. She was considered vulnerable, and her family worried that they might never see her alive. The summer of 2014 came, and there was still no sign of Nollaig. The anniversary of the family's last contact with Nollaig came and went, but at the start of July, they finally got a breakthrough. Nicholas Cassidy was an old friend of Nollaig's who'd been in the scout band with her when they were children. Like all of those who knew Nollaig, he'd been trying to help as best he could. At the start of July, he and his wife traveled to Murcia, Spain for a vacation. It was there that they spotted a woman sleeping under a tree. It was Nollaig. It took some convincing, but Nicholas and his wife were able to convince Nollaig to come back where they were staying and tell her story. She had been traveling around Europe and busking with her violin before it was stolen in Rome. Since then, she'd lost her passport, papers, and access to her bank account. She'd been begging for food. Nollaig was brought home to Northern Ireland and reunited with her relieved family, who asked for prayers to help Nollaig's recovery. The family of Deepak Kundi had already given him a funeral when police realized they hadn't solved his missing person case. Another 8 months would pass before the truth in this strange case was revealed. Deepak disappeared from his home in India in early June of 2022. Few details have been released on the case, such as the last sightings or any possible motivations for his disappearance. He was in his mid-30s at the time, but it was a concerning change for his family. He was reported missing not long after his disappearance, and the search began. On July 17th, a body was discovered on a beach. It matched the general description given of Deepak, and the body was given to the Kandi family. It was not the end to the mystery they would have been hoping for, but it was an answer to the question and a chance to give their loved one a proper funeral. It was only after this funeral that the police realized Deepak wasn't the only missing person from the area that matched the description of the body found on the beach. A DNA test was conducted and confirmed the body belonged to a man named Irshad. The search for Deepak resumed. For some reason, the crime unit became involved in the search, though it isn't clear if they thought Deepak was the victim of a crime or if he had perpetrated one. There was still no sign of the missing man, though, and the case went cold. It wasn't until February of 2023 that the police received the break they needed. Police were conducting routine checks at hotels. A random check of one particular hotel uncovered a man who used Deepak's identification number. The man was later confirmed as being Deepak himself. He was surprised to learn that his family had conducted his funeral and explained that he'd been traveling around the country before recently settling down. The reason behind his disappearance, though, still hasn't been revealed. Percy Pukachiche was missing for more than a month before he was rescued in August of 2022. The 26-year-old had survived on a diet of berries and rabbits while lost in the forest. Percy is a young man from northern Quebec. He was very close to his family and community. But there were still some problems in the area, like many towns and cities, according to Chief Adrian Jerome. It wasn't unusual for some people to go out into the bush to live for periods of time to get away from those issues. Percy was doing just that when he left on July 21st. He wasn't far from the community, and he had done it in the past, with his mother stopping by to bring him some food. When she arrived the next day, Percy's campsite was empty. His provisions had been untouched. The next day, there was still no sign of Percy, and he was reported missing. Thankfully, the case was taken seriously by the local authorities. The police also had a reason to fear for Percy's safety. 3 Anishinaabe communities came together to try to find Percy, with volunteers coming from neighboring towns to take part in search efforts in the wilderness. The search focused on the wooded areas on the shore of the lake closest to where Percy had vanished. Council employees were given paid time off to take part in the search, and food, water, and gas were offered to all of those who were trying to help solve the mystery. Despite the massive search effort, Percy's disappearance didn't gather much attention in the local media, though posts were put out by the local police with information about Percy's last known location and clothing. But it would turn out that all the search efforts had been focused in the wrong location. On the night of August 23rd, teenagers fishing on the far side of the lake heard cries for help. They immediately contacted authorities, who arrived just 15 minutes later. They called out to the person, asking for him to identify himself. He told them he was Percy Pukachiche. How and why Percy had ended up on the other side of the lake was a mystery. His feet were very sore, but he didn't have any other wounds. He had lost significant weight after a month of living off the land, but the survival techniques that he'd been taught at school had come in useful. Percy was taken to the hospital, but he was released the following day. For years, the family and friends of Fernando Cuevas believed that they would never see him again. An appeal by hospital workers in a neighboring country finally answered the mystery of what had happened to the missing man. In 2011, Fernando left his home in Uruguay on a spontaneous trip. It wasn't unusual for the then 36-year-old. Fernando had spent much of his adult life traveling around South America. According to his family, he was extremely studious and hardworking at school, but began to use illegal substances as he got older, and things had spiraled out of control. At one point, he was imprisoned in Brazil for attacking another person, and he'd given up on treatment for his problems with illegal substances. It wasn't unusual for him to disappear for weeks at a time, but when they hadn't heard from him for several weeks, Fernando's friends and family began to fear the worst. More than 3 years passed, and Fernando's family went through the process of having him declared as having passed away. But in 2014, one of Fernando's family members came across a viral post from Argentina. The Facebook post was made by workers at a hospital in the city of Corrientes. For years, they'd been caring for a man who'd forgotten who he was, and now they were hoping they could find his family. The man had been given the name Wilson Perez. In 2011, Wilson had been found on the street, unconscious and with significant wounds. He had been violently attacked. He was wearing women's clothing and had no ID with him. But he did have a piece of paper with the name Wilson Perez. He was rushed to the hospital, where workers believed he might not survive. He was baptized as Wilson Perez and read his last rites. Miraculously, Wilson survived and began the long road to recovery from his traumatic ordeal. But the wounds to his head meant that he could never live independently. It also meant he had forgotten who he was before he arrived at the hospital. He was very friendly and made friends with the nurses at the hospital, who decided to try to solve the mystery of who Wilson Perez really was by setting up a Facebook page for him. As soon as Fernando's parents saw the photo of Wilson, they knew it was their son. They flew to Argentina and reunited with their lost loved one. Mysterious disappearance of Lenny Derrickson is one of the strangest and creepiest missing person cases that was never solved. What happened to the divorced Oklahoma father of 2 and who he went with is an unanswered mystery with the possible true crime story. Lenny was a 39-year-old dairy farmer who lived on a failing farm with his son Jared. On Saturday, March 14, 1988, a white pickup truck pulled up outside while the father and son were eating a 9 p.m. breakfast. If what Jared told investigators was a true story, then the man was interested in buying one of their stud horses. This was an unexpected event because at the time, no such listing was advertised. Lenny was going with this unknown person to Elk City in Oklahoma, and then to the city of Mobile in Texas, but he said that he would not be missing from home before the end of the day. Lenny did not return, and police investigators opened a missing person case. Crime detectives had two leads. One was a possible sighting of Lenny at a coffee house in Elk City a few hours after he vanished without a trace. A second possible sighting was not of Lenny, but rather the man who wanted to buy a horse. A waitress had spotted a person of interest who matched the description provided by Jared. This man was getting breakfast with another man who was doing most of the talking in their conversation. Detectives continued working on the unsolved case until finally, 6 months later, there was a mysterious phone call from a man at a bar in Amarillo, Texas. The unknown caller said their missing person was still alive and could be found at their location. No name was given, but he said that he would wait with Lenny until police responded. Lenny and the caller have now both gone missing, but the bartender verified the story was true. Lenny's strange and unsolved disappearance remains a puzzling missing person mystery ever since. His family do not believe he would have abandoned Jared, who he was very close to, but it's possible he decided to start again and leave everything behind, including his son. Since the sighting at the bar, there's been no new information to help police solve this unbelievable mystery. Ashley Howley of Columbus, Ohio, would mysteriously disappear at the young age of 20, leaving crime investigators with many questions and few answers until years later. On June 16, 2004, the Columbus Police Department responded to a domestic incident with her boyfriend, Robert McMichael. Ashley mysteriously disappeared soon after. Days later, there was still no sign of Ashley, and so her family filed a missing person case in July, and the search for Ashley was on. When the missing person's car was soon found abandoned in a car park, her family suspected foul play. Since a body was never found, the lead investigator did not yet have enough crime scene evidence to solve the mystery. And this is where a rather creepy backstory begins. In late 2004, Christy Robinette, a psychic medium, began to have strange dreams of a ghostly woman talking to her. According to Christy, the woman told her name was Ashley, and in a possible paranormal mystery, the ghost led her to a remote area near the Olentangy River. Christy gave all of this information over to the authorities, also telling them that the ghost of Ashley implicated her then-boyfriend, Robert McMichael. Without probable cause, investigators were unable to excavate the area, but in 2008, Robert was finally arrested and charged in connection with Ashley's disappearance and 2 other similar crimes. Robert's back was against the wall, and with nowhere else to run, he confessed to everything. During his confession, he agreed to lead investigators to Ashley's body, and lo and behold, it was the same area that the psychic had led them to years earlier. Robert was sentenced to life without parole, and Ashley's family were finally able to lay her to rest. On June 3, 1980, 42-year-old Anthony Bird was leaving a pub when he came across a man who identified himself only as John. The two chatted for a while before John agreed to go to Anthony's apartment with him. Days later, Anthony's family were contacted by his worried boss to see what had happened to Anthony, who had been inexplicably absent from work for reasons unknown. 3 days later, the mysterious disappearance of Anthony was solved. Metropolitan Police arrived at Anthony's home to perform a wellness check. When they entered his Kensington Gardens Square apartment, they found his missing body on the bed in a dark and disturbing true crime mystery. The extensive damage found on Anthony could not have been done to himself. Family were informed of the bad news and couldn't think of what happened to him or a criminal motive. An investigation was opened, but without crime scene evidence, the case went unsolved for years. On May 5, 2021, 61-year-old John Paul walked into the Hammersmith police station and stated that he wanted to make a criminal confession, which was caught on camera during a police interview. The true story behind this crime was as follows. In 1980, John Paul was 19. He confessed to tricking Anthony by pretending to want to have relations with him at Anthony's apartment. In reality, he was planning a robbery, but the home invasion went wrong. John Paul told the investigators that he'd been released from treatment for a mental disorder. At trial, his fingerprints connected to the crime scene, and he was sentenced to 19 years in prison. The mysterious disappearance of Cecil Grace in 1910 is one of the oldest aviation mysteries. An experienced pilot, Cecil Grace was eager to win a race over the English Channel. Whoever got the furthest into the mainland Europe won the Baron de Forest prize of £4,000. On December 22, 1910, Cecil Grace was in a short S-27 biplane when he took off from Swingate Down near Dover. This is where the English Channel was thinnest and easiest to cross. He managed to get all the way to France without issue, a seemingly impossible distance for the time period. Other famous pilots, such as Tom Sopwith, had reached only as far as Belgium, which is a third of the distance compared to Cecil Grace's run. The daring pilot wanted to beat his own record and ensure victory, and so he began flying northwest back to England to refuel and make another attempt. What should have taken him about 40 minutes to cross the channel turned into a mysterious disappearance instead, an unsolved case that still needs explaining more than 100 years later. A Coast Guard boat spotted a plane about 6 miles off the coast of Kent that must have been Cecil Grace, but instead of landing at Swingate Down, the plane went missing instead. As people searched for Cecil, investigators hoped the pilot had doubled back to France due to the heavy winds in the area, but this wasn't the case. The unsolved mystery had no further evidence found until January 6th of 1911, when a pair of aviator goggles and a cap washed ashore in Belgium. In mid-March, a missing body was found on the same beach. Even though a body had been found, what happened to the pilot still remains a mystery. The state of the remains meant he couldn't be conclusively identified, and those close to Cecil Grace denied that this missing person was him, arguing that the human remains could not have traveled all the way from the English coast to Belgium. The pilot was legally declared deceased, and since then, no more answers to this unsolved mystery were ever uncovered. The disappeared plane was never found, and if the body discovered in Belgium wasn't the same missing person, then he was never found either. 26-year-old Anna Kane was a known streetwalker in Berks County, Pennsylvania. Her missing body would be discovered in late October of 1988, tearing the Kane family apart. Decades later, the unsolved case would be solved in an unexpected ending to an unbelievable true crime story. From October 22nd through October 23rd, Anna hit the streets. At around 1 a.m., a witness saw Anna walking near Franklin Street and South 6th Street. She went missing for hours, and then her body was found in the woods. A forensic investigation of the marks found on her indicated signs of a struggle. What was especially unusual in this case was Anna's clothes, which were dry despite heavy rain on that night. After examining the crime scene investigation, detectives determined that her clothes were dry because she'd spent her final hours somewhere dry and was then left there. Criminal investigators did not want to let a single shred of evidence go missing from their investigation. Hundreds of people of interest were interviewed for the case, and soon Pennsylvania State Police added their resources to the search as well. In a last-ditch effort to find the person responsible, a local newspaper called the Reading Eagle ran a true crime story about Anna's unsolved case. In February of 1990, a strange letter anonymously came into the newspaper's head office, containing details that only the person responsible would have known. The Pennsylvania State Police felt as though they were being taunted, and were more determined than ever to catch the person responsible. They would finally learn what happened to Anna Kane in 2022 when the Pennsylvania State Police reached out to a forensic laboratory specializing in genetic genealogy. In an unexpected ending, The anonymous letter to case detectives was ironically what identified the criminal responsible. When DNA from saliva on the envelope was sequenced and researched, forensic scientists were able to produce a match. Forensic testing had been done on the envelope in 1990, but science had greatly improved since then, and the mystery man was identified. The Pennsylvania State Police would later announce that Scott Grimm, who had passed away in 2018, had been responsible for the horrific crime. While justice can never be fully served, Anna's family can now have some semblance of closure. 33-year-old Argentinian Rodrigo Falcon had made a comfortable life for himself in Cairngorms National Park. By 2022, Rodrigo had lived there for 8 years and had become a part of the community. His job as a bartender at the Pine Martin Bar allowed him to socialize with people from across the country, and he was said to be extremely friendly and outgoing. Just a few weeks before Christmas, Rodrigo mysteriously vanished after being captured on CCTV, and has never been seen or heard from since. December 11th, 2022 started a joyous occasion for Rodrigo and his friends. They hit the local bars in Aviation before heading to the local nightclub, The Vault. Rodrigo and his friends drank and danced, leaving at around 2 a.m. At 3:12 a.m., Rodrigo was caught on CCTV, walking down Grampian Road, which leads towards the southern end of Aviation. Rodrigo was also spotted by cameras and employees at a local Premier Inn at around 3:15 a.m. Other witnesses reported seeing a man matching Rodrigo's description between 4 and 5 a.m. walking southbound on the A9. Shortly after Rodrigo was reported missing, the Scottish police flocked to the A9 and found footprints in the snow that led through a field and onto the side of a junction where they abruptly stopped. What baffled investigators most was the route that Rodrigo had taken that night was in the opposite direction of his home. His friends and family stated that he knew the area well and couldn't think of any reason why he would be heading down the A9. Police in Scotland, along with its dive and marine unit, have been scouring lochs and River Spey for Rodrigo since he disappeared, but no sign of him has been found. Throughout December, Scotland saw record low temperatures, reaching a frightening -15 Celsius. Police in Scotland confirmed that Rodrigo left the Vault nightclub wearing just a red jacket and baggy jeans, making them all the more concerned for his welfare. Rodrigo Falcon is described as 5'6" with a slim build and brown hair, a mustache and a beard. Anyone with information is asked to contact Police Scotland on 101, quoting case number 2387, December 11. The relationship between 42-year-old Jesus Perez and 27-year-old Cassandra Ion had been anything but stable. The two had welcomed a child into the world, but this did little to help with the relationship. Jesus was often violent towards Cassandra and was said to be extremely controlling. In 2020, Cassandra finally broke things off with Jesus and moved into a home in Loyal, Wisconsin with her child. Cassandra's mother lived right across the road, and the move proved to be a positive step. Things were finally looking up, but then in October of 2020, Cassandra would mysteriously disappear. On October 3rd, 2020, at around 3:45 a.m., Cassandra drove a friend to their home in Unity, Wisconsin, around 16 miles from her home in Loyal. The two friends parted ways, and Cassandra got back into her black 2015 Chevrolet Impala and drove off into the distance. Unfortunately, Cassandra never made it home, and she was reported missing soon after. The Clark County Sheriff's Office was assigned to the case, and what they would uncover would shock them. After breaking off the relationship with Jesus, Cassandra confided in friends and family that he had been stalking her. He would continually turn up at her place of work and would interfere in her private life. On one occasion, Jesus freaked out after finding out that Cassandra had been at a bar with two men. Shortly before she disappeared, she told her friends that if anything happened to her, Jesus did it. Investigators took these claims very seriously and began investigating Jesus as a person of interest. They discovered that on the day Cassandra disappeared, Jesus' phone pinged in the same area as she was, and that he later reported the phone missing. Jesus had also made searches for how to make a homemade silencer and other alarming searches. By June of 2021, the Clark County Sheriff's Office had enough evidence to charge Jesus with Cassandra's disappearance. In September of 2022, Jesus Perez was found guilty on 3 counts, including hiding a body, and will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Jesus refused to cooperate with investigators and will not give up the location of Cassandra's body. Cassandra remains missing, and the Clark County Sheriff's Office has now teamed up with the Wisconsin Department of Justice to locate her. Cassandra Ione is described as a Hispanic female with black hair, brown eyes, 5'4" and 185 pounds. Her ears are pierced, and she has the following tattoos of roses, rosary beads, and a dove with the name Alberto on her left arm, and roses on her right arm and shoulder. She was last seen wearing a black long-sleeved shirt, blue jeans, and brown boots. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Clark County Sheriff's Office at 715-743-3157. 75-year-old Candy Sturgill and 83-year-old Shirley Weaver of Susanville, California, were described as the best of friends. The two could often be found walking in the California wilderness, looking for their next favorite hiking spot. When not out adventuring, Candy and Shirley would be with their families, and they were both described as loving and caring. In October of 2020, Candy and Shirley would set out on one of their expeditions to Wendell, California. Unfortunately, something went awry, and Candy Sturgill is still missing to this day. On October 25, 2020, Candy and Shirley climbed into Candy's Toyota RAV4, headed for Wendell. Witnesses recalled seeing Candy and Shirley that day, around 10 miles from Wendell. After this, the two simply dropped off the map. When they failed to return home from their hike, their respective families contacted the Lassen County Sheriff's Office and reported them missing. A wide-scale search of the area was immediately put in place, with officers heading out on foot and by air. Candy and Shirley's family and friends also joined in the search, but in the initial days of the investigation, nothing was found. Local authorities were determined to find Candy and Shirley, and on November 10, 2020, they would make a horrifying discovery. Near Mixie Flat Road along the border of Nevada and California, searchers found Candy's abandoned Toyota RAV4. Shirley's body was slumped inside, and help had been spelled out on the ground around the car using various items. One of the tires was flat and the hood was up, indicating that Candy had tried to fix the problem. While Shirley's body was found, there was still no sign of Candy. Searchers continued well into November of 2020, but failed to find any sign of her. Investigators do not believe that the women met with foul play, and the circumstances of Candy's disappearance are not thought to be suspicious. Candy's family and friends continue to search for her remains so that they can bring her home. Candy Sturgill is described as a white female with blonde hair, brown eyes, 5'6" and 145 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Lassen County Sheriff's Office at 530-257-6121, quoting case number 20103-0007. 29-year-old Heather Nicole McCool was described as a caring and devoted mother to her 4 children, and lived with her boyfriend and children in the Mars Hill neighborhood in Philadelphia, Mississippi. In December of 2020, Heather and her boyfriend were preparing for Christmas and were excited to see the children rip open their presents. Unfortunately, Heather never got the chance to witness this, as she mysteriously disappeared just a day before Christmas. According to the Winston County Sheriff's Office, Heather was last seen on Mars Hill Road on December 24, 2020. After this, she simply vanished into thin air and has never been seen or heard from again. Heather's mother, Jenny Sullivan, would later tell investigators that she hadn't heard from her daughter since December 6th, adding an extra layer of confusion to this case. Jenny told WCBI Quote, "I know she would not have missed Christmas with her babies. If there was any way possible, she would not have. When things got bad, she would always come home. It's not like her to not come home." There has been little coverage of Heather's disappearance, and her family is appealing to anyone with information to come forward. The Winston County Sheriff's Office assured the public that the investigation into the disappearance of Heather is still active and ongoing, but it appears to have run cold. She's described as a white female with brown hair and green eyes, 5'4" to 5'5" and 130 to 140 pounds. There's currently a $10,000 reward for information, and anyone with information is asked to contact Scott Coors of the Winston County Sheriff's Office at 662-773-5881. 88-year-old Betty Hayes of Holiday, Missouri, was regarded as a staple of her community. She had worked as a nurse for over 35 years and owned a herd of cattle that she proudly tended to. Those in Holiday knew that if they ever needed any help, Betty was the one to call. In December of 2021, Betty and her children were getting ready to celebrate the holidays together, but one cold December morning would change the course of their lives forever. On December 16, 2021, Betty went about her daily routine, picking up some food and shopping at around 4:15 p.m. At 9:30 p.m. that night, she spoke on the phone with her daughter about their upcoming plans for the holidays. As the mother and daughter said goodbye, neither of them knew that it would be the final farewell. On December 17th, Betty's son, Mike Hayes, drove to her home on the 1700 block of Route C and was confronted with a terrible sight. The front door had been kicked in and the door jamb was broken. Mike had driven to her home after multiple calls had gone unanswered. When he failed to locate his mother in the home and found that her car had been left in the driveway, he called the Monroe County Sheriff's Office and reported her missing. The Monroe County Sheriff's Office would conduct a full forensic search of the home and discovered that Betty had left behind her purse, wallet, and keys. During the investigation, detectives also discovered that two men, John Condy and Joshua McNabb, had allegedly broken into Betty's home in May and June of 2021. The two had attempted to steal several items and were eventually charged for these crimes. Investigators have been unable to link Condy and McNabb to Betty's disappearance, and the Monroe County Sheriff's Office is still investigating whether the two instances are linked. Betty's family has offered a $10,000 reward for any information that brings her home. Betty Hayes is described as a white female with graying blonde hair, blue eyes, 5'2" and 86 pounds. She may be wearing a dark-colored hat and a dark coat. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Monroe County Sheriff's Office at 660-327-4060, quoting case number 2100426. 50-year-old David A. Janotka, a blue-eyed California resident with a thick head of gray hair, mysteriously vanished without a trace on vacation at the island of Maui in February of 2014, leaving his loved ones with nothing but unanswered questions about what could have happened in this unexplained missing person mystery. On February 22nd, an abandoned rental car was discovered on the side of the road with one of the windows open. David's cell phone, car keys, and 2 pieces of luggage were found with it, but he was missing from the scene. Police soon learned that a person of interest matching David's description was spotted leaving the area. Since the car was discovered and David was possibly seen traveling on foot, he was not considered a missing person case right away. As such, David's girlfriend was not contacted by case investigators when his missing items were found. On March 14, 2014, Maui Search and Rescue reported via their Facebook page that there had been credible sightings of David that week mixed in with the homeless population. David had a troubled past and may have been experiencing some kind of episode at the time of his unsolved disappearance. It's not recommended for people to try and speak with David if he is seen. Instead, you're asked to contact the Maui Police Department at 808-244-6429. 50-year-old Julie Early disappeared under extremely suspicious circumstances not long after an argument with her husband, Craig. Her missing person case remains unsolved ever since. It was May 21st, 2012 when Julie went missing. After the argument that afternoon, Craig uninvited one of Julie's sons from a visit on Memorial Day weekend. Craig was still angry at the son when he left for a roofing job at 3:30 p.m. He came back to their home in Trotwood, Ohio to find his missing wife had vanished without a trace. Some of her personal medications were also missing, along with $6,000 in cash and Julie's curling iron. Not missing were personal photos and other sentimental belongings that her family thinks she would have taken with her if her unsolved case was a voluntary disappearance. Craig figured she had gone to stay with a friend or family, which wasn't an unusual story for the unhappy couple. When she was still nowhere to be found on May 30th, 9 days later, it was clear she was a missing person. Since then, there have been no case updates on what happened to Julie. Her family suspects Craig was behind the mysterious disappearance of Julie, as he was the last person to see her, and also because he waited over a week to report her as a missing person. Craig argues Julie's ex-husband was responsible for the disappearance of his wife. During an investigation, FBI agents asked him to take a polygraph test, but Craig refused because he doesn't think that they're capable of telling the true story. None of Julie's medication has been refilled since she vanished, and investigators believe this case is one of foul play, but there's no criminal evidence to prove this is a true crime story. Anyone with information on this missing person case should contact Trotwood Police at 937-854-3988. Florence Akpiluk mysteriously disappeared from Nome, Alaska, leaving behind her young daughter, boyfriend, and a job at the Norton Sound Health Corporation. Her rather recent missing person case began on August 29, 2020, a few days after her 33rd birthday. She was living in Nome with her boyfriend and her daughter from a previous relationship. Her family was concerned with her even before her mysterious disappearance, as she had a drinking habit and had gotten into trouble with the law. On the day Florence went missing, she and her older sister got into an argument about getting help for her addiction. What happened to her after she left her home remains an unsolved mystery. Days later, she was reported as a missing person case, and her sister went to the bars in Nome to see if she could be found. One bartender had spotted the missing person leaving with a gold miner to continue partying. Gold miners camping out on the West Beach during the summer was not an unusual story for this part of Alaska. West Beach was about a mile away from Nome, and the next place her sister would go to try to solve her mysterious disappearance. She went from tent to tent, asking if anybody had seen Florence or knew what had happened to cause her disappearance. If what she learned was a true story, then one person saw Florence leaving a tent at 4 p.m. on August 31st, which was shortly before she had been reported missing. She had left behind her shoes, socks, and jacket. Police searched the footage from nearby CCTV cameras, but did not turn up any new leads to help this potential crime story get solved. Florence's family continued to ask what happened to her and where she is today. Florence is described as having black hair, brown eyes, and wearing glasses. She was 5'2" and weighed 142 pounds. Anyone with information that could help solve this cold case should contact Nome Police at 907-443-5262. The mysterious disappearance of Marlo Moku in Hilo, Hawaii was a strange missing person case that has so far defied explanation. 14 years ago, the mother of 3 left to go to a nearby convenience store and vanished without a trace. On September 23, 2008, Marlo's boyfriend came home for lunch while she was home with her 2-year-old daughter. At 11:30 a.m., she left the child home and headed to a nearby 7-Eleven convenience store in her blue Chevrolet Corsica sedan. That's where this missing person case becomes strange. It shouldn't have taken Marlo long to arrive at the store, but witnesses described seeing Marlo at the 7-Eleven hours later between 2 and 5 p.m., or even as late as 7 p.m. At 4 p.m., when she didn't stop back home before picking her other kids up from school, her family knew she had gone missing. Her car was discovered 17 days after she became a missing person at the bottom of a cliff in Hakalau. There was no sign that anybody had been in the car during the plunge. Much crime scene evidence was lost at sea, and criminal detectives were unable to say if foul play was involved. The car had no mechanical problems. Missing was the license plate and a number of personal belongings. Still, this gave police no clues as to what happened to Marlo, and her missing person case is very strange and remains unsolved. Marlo is described as being 5'7" and weighed 180 pounds when she vanished into thin air. She had shoulder-length black hair and brown eyes. She also had the word "sassy" tattooed on her ankle. Anyone with information should contact Hawaii County Police Department at 808-961-2383. The disappearance of Echo Lloyd took place on May 10, 2020, Mother's Day. Her mysterious disappearance was completely out of the blue, and investigators have no leads to get her missing person case solved. A recently divorced 43-year-old woman living in Edwards, Missouri, Echo lived alone and was renovating a house she had just bought. The day before Echo became a missing person, she spoke to her daughter Kelsey on the phone, who was looking forward to seeing her mother the following day. On Mother's Day, Kelsey stopped by with a card and flowers for her mother, but found nobody home. Her car was missing from her driveway, and nobody answered the door. She left her gifts on the back porch with a note asking Echo to call her that evening. That call never came. Over the next 5 days, Kelsey grew more worried as her phone calls went unanswered. On May 15th, she went to check again. Her mother's car was in the driveway, but there was still nobody at the door. When she forced her way inside, she found what looked like evidence of a crime scene. The house was a mess, which was very unlike Echo. Trash and food with mold on it had been left out. There was also a Walmart receipt dated May 10th with Echo's signature on the bottom. Kelsey found her mother's missing purse and personal ID in her bedroom, but her house keys, cell phone, medication, and a weapon used for home protection were all missing. The mysterious disappearance of Echo was reported following Kelsey's second home visit. Crime scene investigators found no signs of foul play, but Echo's family don't believe she would have disappeared by herself. Echo was having problems with a neighbor, and allegedly told family the neighbor was possessive, but case investigators have no reason to believe he would have done anything to harm her, and she has no real enemies. Echo is described as being 5'4" and weighing between 100 and 110 pounds at the time of her unsolved disappearance. She had a number of tattoos, including the names Kelsey, Casey, Caitlin, and Kylie on her right wrist, and a rose on her ankle. There's a reward for information in this missing person case, and anybody with information should contact the Missouri State Highway Patrol at 573-526-6178 or the Benton County Sheriff's Office at 660-438-6135. Mary Ann Alexie was a 33-year-old mother trying to make a better life for herself when she vanished without a trace in Anchorage, Alaska in 2012. More than 10 years on from her disappearance, no trace has been found to explain this strange disappearance. Mary Ann had only recently moved from Fairbanks to Anchorage when she vanished. In fact, she'd traveled south to Anchorage just the day before she went missing. She arrived on October 9th, 2012 at about noon. Her plans were to attend the Alaska Career College and study to become a medical assistant. But Mary Ann didn't attend a meeting scheduled later that day and would never make classes. The next day, at around 3 a.m., Mary Ann called her friend Peggy. She sounded disoriented and drunk, and she was lost in the Spenard area of Anchorage. Spenard is known for its criminal activity and was a particularly dangerous part of town. This would be the last contact anybody had with Mary Ann. It was normal for Marianne to talk to her family at least once a day. When she went an entire day without trying to contact her young children, her family figured that something was wrong and she was reported missing. At first, police believed that she'd simply gotten drunk and wandered off somewhere to find shelter. Marianne had a history of problems with alcohol, although it's not clear how severe that is. Even without that history, it seemed likely Marianne had gotten drunk and tried to find shelter in a shed or some other outbuilding. But when searches in the area where Marianne went missing turned up nothing, the police started looking for other explanations. Marianne's family traveled to Anchorage to help look for her. Waterways were searched, as well as wooded areas near where Marianne went missing, but there was no trace of the missing person. If she was drunk the night she vanished, it's not known if she purchased the alcohol at a store or at a club. Nobody remembers seeing Marianne while out that night, or at least they haven't come forward with that information. According to her Charlie Project page, foul play is a possibility in this missing person case. It's possible Marianne ran into the wrong person while intoxicated in an area that she didn't know. Marianne was 4'11" and weighed 120 pounds when she disappeared. She's described as a Native American woman with black hair, brown eyes, and a tattoo on her upper right arm. Anybody with information in this case can contact the Anchorage Police at 907-786-8900. In May of 2022, Shane Edwards vanished without a trace in a puzzling missing person case. Shane had been at home with his wife and 3 children when he apparently left, never to be seen again. His family still has no explanation for his mysterious disappearance and no idea where he is now. Shane was a 42-year-old father of 4 living in New Zealand at the time of his disappearance. He had a good marriage and loved his children. He was a talented Maui performing artist, and his family believed he was on the path to receiving royal honors for his work in the New Zealand tourism industry. There was nothing out of the ordinary about May 14, 2022. Shane and his wife Alvina had spent the day at home with their 3 youngest children. He had offered to make dinner, and when they finished eating, he said he would clear up. Alvina left the room to tend to the children. When she returned about 20 minutes later, Shane was nowhere to be seen. The plates had been moved from the table, but they hadn't been washed, and the back door was closed, which was unusual. Shane's bike was still outside. Usually, this was how Shane would get around, as he didn't have a car. For him to have gone anywhere without it was extremely unusual. Alvina knew that her husband was missing, but tried to assure herself that he'd simply gone for a walk or was visiting a friend. 2 days passed with Alvina and Shane's family and friends trying to get a hold of him. Shane's wallet and cell phone had both disappeared with him, but nobody could get through to him. After running out of options, Shane was reported missing to the police. The police made an appeal for information. Alvina had never heard a car in their driveway, but it seemed likely that Shane had gotten into a vehicle at some point. It was possible he was hitchhiking, but police have yet to find evidence that this was the case. A number of sightings have been reported, but investigations into each have proven them to be of somebody else. Shane's phone and bank cards haven't been used since his disappearance, and there are no leads other than potential sightings to follow. Police are continuing to appeal for anybody who might have seen Shane to come forward. He's described as being lean with a slim build and between 1.8 and 1.85 meters tall. He has dark hair and brown eyes and was wearing a brown Swandry jersey, light blue jeans, and black shoes when he disappeared. Information can be passed to police on 105 with file number 220518/6338, or call Crime Stoppers at 0800-555-111. Jordan Moray disappeared without a trace in July of 2019. Leaving his game console running and his phone on charge as he left his home in Aberdare, Wales. Nobody has seen or heard from him since, but his family is hopeful he's still alive. According to his family, Jordan always preferred the outdoors. In an appeal for information, his mother described Jordan heading out into the wilderness with a disposable barbecue and some food. He felt more comfortable outdoors and alone. He was also very fit, competing in endurance runs. Despite this, there were never any signs that he wanted to completely disappear. The last confirmed sighting of Jordan was on July 29, 2019. He met with a friend in nearby Brode. Not much is known about the meeting, but it apparently didn't raise any alarms with his friends. Nobody expected he would simply disappear without a trace. It was a few days before anybody noticed he was missing. On August 2nd, family members went to visit his house to check on him. They found his front door unlocked, but there was nobody home. Inside, Jordan's PlayStation was still running and his phone was still on charge. It looked as if he was simply in another room. However, Jordan had left with a backpack, shoes, and a headlamp, indicating where he might have gone. It was still extremely out of the ordinary for Jordan to just disappear, and his family reported him as missing. Over the years, there have been a few sightings of the missing individual, including one in 2020. A man believed he spoke to Jordan and contacted police in 2021 after seeing a missing person appeal. Jordan's family traveled to the town and put up missing person posters, but it couldn't be confirmed if Jordan had actually ever been in the town. Jordan's family have also gone on numerous hikes in the areas where he was known to frequent, hoping to find some sign that he's okay. So far, they've only ever come back empty-handed. Police have appealed directly to Jordan, asking him to contact them and let them know that he's okay. Anybody with information on this case can call the police on 101 with reference number 284-205 or contact Crime Stoppers at 0800-555-111. Jean Tighe had traveled all over the world but always came back home to Ireland for Christmas. That stopped in July of 2020 when she apparently vanished without a trace in Lisbon, Portugal. Jean was 41 years old and one of 5 children. She loved to travel and had spent several months in Portugal when she mysteriously disappeared. July was to be the end of her trip, as she'd booked a flight home for the 15th. 2 days before her flight, she spoke with her sister on the phone. Everything seemed fine, and Jean appeared to be her normal self. Sometime after the call, she left the hostel where she was staying with her handbag, phone, and bank cards. She left behind her main traveling bag, passport, and a second phone at the hostel. Nobody was able to get in touch with Jean after this point. Her boyfriend reported her missing, but she was never listed as a missing person in Portugal. Jean's family has criticized the handling of the case by local police and claims the information they've uncovered came from private investigators. Jean allegedly mentioned to one of the hostel workers that she was going to meet up with a male friend in Brazil. It seemed as if she didn't expect to be out for long and clearly had intentions to come back to the hostel. The man has never been identified, and it's not known if Jean actually met up with him the day she vanished. The family also discovered that the phone Jean had left at the hostel had also gone missing, but who took it is another unsolved mystery. Jean's family doesn't believe she disappeared of her own accord. Even if she had reason to, leaving behind her passport would have made things that much harder. The police have also said it's unlikely Jean took her own life. They claim the reason why Jean wasn't put on the missing person register in Portugal was so suspects didn't panic. Jean is described as being 5 foot 5 inches tall, of a slim build with blue eyes and brown hair. Any information can be passed on to LBT Global at 44-1983-718-802. When Svetlozar Yotov walked out of his North London home in October of 2021, his flatmates expected that he would be back soon. He left behind all his personal identification and belongings and hasn't been seen since. Svet was 30 years old when he vanished on the evening of October 8, 2021. He was born in Bulgaria and had been living and studying in London for at least the past 10 years, and his immediate family lived nearby. After earning his degree at the University of Westminster, he worked at the same university as a research assistant. The week before Svet vanished without a trace, there didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary about the young man. He talked with his mother on the phone at least once every other day, as was the norm for him, and he met up with his friend for a takeout meal that evening. According to his cousin, he didn't have any personal or financial problems and wasn't involved in any kind of crime. Later on, he told his flatmate that he had a headache and he was going for a jog along the nearby canal to clear his head, but he wouldn't come back. The following day, Svet was scheduled to babysit for his little brother. When he didn't arrive, his mother tried contacting him over the phone but got no response. For the 2 days after Svet vanished, his phone rang without an answer. By Monday, it had either been switched off or the battery had run out. According to Svet's family, the police were slow to act in his missing person case. Svet's loved ones reported him missing a few days after he vanished, but Svet was deemed to be low risk and there wasn't a huge amount of action from police. Instead, Svet's loved ones set about spreading awareness about his missing person case, hoping to jog some memories and figure out what might have happened to him. They searched homeless shelters and hospitals and approached local businesses for CCTV, though no CCTV evidence of Svet was recovered. It was very out of character for him to go without speaking to his family for a few days, let alone a week. After 1 year passed without any sign of him, Svet's family felt certain something bad had happened to him, as he wouldn't voluntarily stay away for so long. The police have said they're committed to finding Svet safe and well. Svet is described as being 1.75 meters tall, with dark brown hair, brown eyes, and a slim build. He may have been wearing a navy blue jacket with orange detailing when he vanished. Information can be passed to the police at 101 or via the Missing People charity at 116000. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.